Chapter 433. Seeing his gaze, I couldn't help but wryly grin. Although I wasn't afraid of suing Xiu with my current strength, Su Wei wasn't killed by me, so I didn't want to be the scapegoat. Fortunately, Suing Xiu only coldly glared at me before turning his head to the side. It was obvious that he was suppressing the anger in his heart for the sake of the overall situation. It seemed that this person wasn't as reckless as he appeared to be. Suing Xiu didn't say anything. Instead, Elder Zhao waited until everyone's attention was focused on him before he said in a clear voice, "Today's Zhongyuan Grand Competition is the most important event of our corpse sect. Everyone here is a pillar of the sect, so you must display your full strength in this competition. After the competition, any disciple that can obtain a ranking will have a limitless future. I won't say anything else. Everything will be revealed on the stage. Let's begin." Following his order, a few attendants from the Purple Zombie Cave and Black Zombie Cave came to the square formations below the stage and announced the lineup for the competition. This competition was different from the previous ones. It no longer followed a one-on-one duel. Instead, based on the previous performance, a few seeded members will be determined in each group. Then, each group will be divided into 10 groups. Each group would have 10 people fighting each other to determine the winner. The winner would then enter the top 10 of each group. After that, the top 10 would have a second round of competition to determine the final winner. At the same time, the top 3 would be determined based on their performance. Because this was a rule that had always been used, the attendants didn't say much and simply announced the grouping before leaving. I didn't know how the 3rd and 4th era groups decided on the seeded players, but the 2nd era groups that I was in easily decided on the list. I just had to choose from the 20 people in Purple Zombie Cave. They were all in Glory Memory Realm, and their strength wasn't something that the people in Black Zombie Cave could compare to. Of course, the final 10 seeded members weren't just from the Purple Zombie Cave. There was an exception, and that was me. This result wasn't out of my expectations, and the others weren't surprised either. After all, in the first competition, Zhang Tianxi, who was at the middle stage of Glory of Knowledge, was defeated by me. On the other hand, the sacrificial evil spirit's Taodai technique had already been revealed, so there was no need for me to hide it. Against the sacrificial evil spirit's Taodai technique, it was hard to say how many of the corpse sect disciples would be able to protect their corpse puppets. The elders of the corpse sect must have thought of this, so they decided to make me a seeded player in order to recover some of their losses. The corpse sect style of doing things was concise and pragmatic, so there were no more formalities. Elder Zhao waved his hand, and the competition officially began. The first to start was not our 2nd era group, but the oldest 4th era group. The weakest disciple of the 4 era group was at the later stages of Glory of Knowledge. There were a few seeded contestants who were close to Master of Heaven Realm. However, I looked closely, and there was nothing special about their battles. Most of them relied on their puppets, and there were some who fought to the death. Their cultivation techniques were also nothing special. Maybe it was because my cultivation had increased and my horizons had broadened. After looking for a while, I felt bored and closed my eyes to rest. It wasn't until noon that the first round of the 4th era group and the 3rd era group ended, and it was finally our 2nd era group's turn. I was placed in the 10th group, and it was only after everyone else had finished fighting that it was finally my turn to go on stage. After I went on stage, I glanced around. The elders of the corpse sect were really meticulous. The people in my group were all disciples of the Black Zombie Cave, and their cultivations were all at the Pressure Point Realm. There was nothing to say. After I called out the sacrificial evil spirit, the 9 people in my group directly admitted defeat and left the stage. After leaving the stage, they all encouraged me, telling me to defeat all the disciples of the Purple Zombie Cave and gain face for the disciples of the Black Zombie Cave. In the intense competition, our group was the most harmonious. We didn't even need to fight before the winner was decided. After we finished here, the final 10 matches of the Zhongyuan competition officially began. The top 10 matches were also a 10-person battle royale, but it was different from the previous group matches. Everyone had overcome many obstacles to reach this step, so the difference in strength was very small. No one dared to be sure that they would be able to obtain first place. Of course, I was the only exception. In the second era group, the highest cultivation was only at the glorious memory late stage. With the sacrificial evil spirits cultivation, even if the other 9 joined hands, they wouldn't be his opponent. Just like before, the fourth era group and the third era group started their matches first. In these two groups, most of the people that made it to the end were people at the glorious memory late stage or even glorious memory complete stage. In the chaotic battle royale of 10 people, they would either focus their firepower on one person or be in a deadlock with each other. The situation was much better than before. After watching these 2 matches, it was finally the second era group's turn to fight. I casually brought the sacrificial evil spirit to the stage. Just as I went up, I met Shin Feng Lin, who had just provoked me. The guy had brought his corpse puppet and was blocking the exit of the stage. When I came over, he didn't even look at me. Instead, he stared at the sacrificial evil spirit for a long time. Then he contemptuously smiled and said, "In the end, a corpse puppet is just an inanimate object. I want to see how long your corpse puppet can last against me. When the time comes, I'll also destroy a corpse puppet to see what it feels like." Looking at his expression as if he was my mortal enemy, I could only helplessly smile wryly. I didn't say anything as I walked around him and entered the crowd. The previous 2 matches had started immediately after going up the stage. I thought that it would be the same for our group, but I didn't expect that before Elder Zhao, who was in charge of this competition, could say anything, Su Yingxiu, who had been sitting at the side with a gloomy expression, stood up and looked at us from afar. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately felt that something was wrong. As I had expected, Su Yingxiu gloomily looked at me for a while before he loudly said to everyone, "The Zhongyuan competition is to test and promote the cultivation of my corpse sect disciples. Although my corpse sect disciples have corpse puppets to help them, when it comes to actual combat, one's own cultivation is still the most important. Thus, I hereby announce that in the second era group's top 10 competition, no one is allowed to use the power of corpse puppets. You must use your own cultivation to fight and determine the final victor." As soon as he said this, everyone present was in an uproar. Almost everyone's eyes focused on me. This matter, coupled with Su Wei's death, didn't even need to think about it. Everyone subconsciously believed that Su Yingxiu was targeting me. However, I felt that something was strange. If Su Yingxiu wanted to deal with me, he didn't need to wait until now. The only reason he hadn't done anything was because of the Taotai technique that the evil sacrificial spirit had used. The matter of the Taotai technique was far from over, so why would Su Yingxiu act so hastily? I thought about it, and suddenly remembered the conversation I had overheard between the corpse sect master, Yu Wenming, and Yin Dongyue in the Yin Energy Passage. At that time, the 2 of them looked flustered and said that once the Taotai technique was used, the matter of the past would be exposed. They also said that if the ancestor found out, he would kill thousands of corpse sect disciples. Could it be that the 2 of them had secretly given such an order? Before I could think about it, Elder Zhao hastily asked Su Yingxiu, "Junior brother Su, our corpse sect's rule has always been to treat corpse puppets the same as humans. Why did you say that? If you have any grudges, you can settle them privately. You must not disturb the competition." It was obvious that Elder Zhao had the same idea as the others. However, Su Yingxiu shook his head with a smile and said, "Senior brother Zhao, don't wrongly accuse me. The sect master asked me to tell you this. If senior brother Zhao doesn't believe me, you can ask sect master Yuan." This. Elder Zhao suddenly hesitated. After a moment of silence, he announced that the competition was suspended and hurriedly went to find Yuan to verify it. Elder Zhao was hesitant, but I was almost certain that Su Yingxiu didn't need to lie so easily. This order was most likely made by Yu Wenming, and the reason was similar to what I had guessed. Chapter 434. Not long after, Elder Zhao returned. From his slightly displeased face, it was obvious that he had gone to verify the results of his trip. When he returned to the rostrum, Su Yingxiu smiled and asked him, "How was it?" Elder Zhao didn't reply, but turned to the 10 people on the stage and nodded. "This competition will be carried out according to Elder Su's rules. After he said that, everyone's gazes once again fell on me. It was different from the previous times, pure surprise. This time, most of the people's gazes were filled with schadenfreude. It was obvious that everyone felt that I was done for. I also started to mutter in my heart. It wasn't that I was afraid. After all, they were just a group of children at the early and middle stage of the glorious knowledge realm. The problem was that the evil, sacrificial spirit couldn't fight. If I wanted to win, I would have to reveal my true cultivation. I quickly calculated in my mind. With my current strength, not to mention revealing my cultivation, even if my identity was completely revealed, the people from the corpse sect wouldn't be able to stop me from entering the Tianyin cave. However, the situation in the Tianyin cave was unclear, and the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain were eyeing the corpse sect. If it wasn't necessary, I didn't want to reveal my identity. However, if I didn't reveal my identity, how should I deal with the current situation? After pondering for a while, I gradually came up with an idea. Just as Elder Zhao was about to announce the start of the competition, I suddenly interrupted him. I turned to Chen Fenglin, who was standing not far from me, and said in a stern voice, "Chen Fenglin, today you have repeatedly insulted me. Do you really think that I, Wang Lin, don't have a trace of bravery?" My sudden voice stunned everyone. The first one to react was Chen Fenglin. Anger and embarrassment flashed across his face as he sneered. "Could it be that you know that you have no hope of winning this large competition, so you decided to make a scene? Before, I thought you were my opponent, but now that I can't use my corpse puppet, you can't even be considered my opponent. Bravery? Hee hee. I don't care if you have it or not." As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Zhao frowned and said coldly, "Settle your personal grudges privately. Don't disturb the order of the tournament." I turned my head to look at Elder Zhao and smiled at him. Elder Zhao is right. We should settle our personal grudges in private. Chen Fenglin and I don't know each other, but today he has humiliated me over and over again, so I want to have a life and death duel with him. There were life and death duels in the Metaphysics Association and the Corpse Sect. Moreover, unlike the Metaphysics Association, the Corpse Sect had always encouraged life and death duels. As long as one didn't challenge someone with a lower cultivation level, they could engage in a life and death duel at any time and place. Furthermore, the challenged couldn't refuse. Hearing my words, the entire crowd was in an uproar. Elder Zhao, who was on the platform, opened his mouth and stared blankly for a long time. In the end, he smiled and took half a step back without saying anything. Since he had expressed that he wouldn't interfere, the others naturally had nothing to say. Even Su Yingqiu frowned and looked at me in silence. Since the elders didn't say anything, Chen Fenglin naturally didn't have a leeway to refuse. However, he didn't seem to want to refuse and just looked at me with disdain. "There's a road to heaven, but you don't want to take it. Originally, I didn't think of you as an opponent, so I might have let you go. But you actually want a life and death duel. That's fine, then I'll help you." Chen Fenglin was so angry that he laughed and continued, "There's no need to look for a venue. Let's do it on this stage. What do you think?" I didn't waste any words with him. I waved my hand, and the sacrificial evil spirit walked over. Yu Wenming had specifically made a rule that corpse puppets weren't allowed in this tournament. However, he couldn't change the rules of a life and death duel, so he could still use corpse puppets. Seeing that I was about to make a move, the other people on the stage tactfully left and cleared the stage. Chen Fenglin didn't live up to his title as a prodigy. Seeing the sacrificial evil spirit walk over, the disdain on his face instantly disappeared. He solemnly chanted an incantation. At the same time, his corpse puppet leaped out from behind him and walked towards the sacrificial evil spirit. Looking at his corpse puppet, I was slightly stunned. No wonder this fellow was so confident. Apart from his cultivation at the later stages of glory of consciousness, his corpse puppet was slightly stronger than him, faintly reaching the level of complete glory of consciousness. If he hadn't met me, he could have easily gotten first place in the second era group with just his corpse puppet alone. It was a pity that his luck wasn't good. Just when I needed a scapegoat, he just happened to bump into me. "Kill him," I ordered the sacrificial evil spirit coldly. At this moment, Chun Fenglin's corpse puppet walked in front of the sacrificial evil spirit. After receiving my order, the sacrificial evil spirit didn't give his opponent any chance. He didn't use any mystical spells and just extended his hand to grab the neck of the corpse puppet. Immediately after, he raised his other hand and lightly patted the top of the corpse puppet's head. Instantly, the corpse puppet slumped to the ground. At the same time, a large amount of gray smoke floated out from its ugly mouth and nostrils. The sacrificial evil spirit opened his mouth and swallowed all of it. The sacrificial evil spirit's actions seemed slow, but in reality, it was very quick. Until now, Chun Fenglin hadn't even used a single spell. Moreover, he had obviously forgotten about the spell that he was halfway through. He looked at the sacrificial evil spirit blankly, his face filled with disbelief. It seemed that he couldn't believe that his corpse puppet had already turned into a pile of smelly meat on the ground. The sacrificial evil spirit didn't give him much time to think. After dropping the corpse puppet, he directly walked in front of Chun Fenglin. At this moment, Chun Fenglin finally reacted. He didn't care about any spells and desperately took out his black sword-shaped magic tool. He was panic-stricken and slashed at the sacrificial evil spirit. Chun Fenglin, who had lost his composure, couldn't withstand a single blow. The sacrificial evil spirit's movements were almost the same as his palm. Chun Fenglin's frightened face froze forever. After everything was done, the sacrificial evil spirit calmly walked back and stood next to me like a cold, grim reaper. At this moment, everyone in the arena finally regained their composure. They looked at Chun Fenglin's corpse on the ground and kept silent. After Elder Zhao on the platform gave the order, the Purple Zombie Cave's disciples on duty came and carried Chun Fenglin's corpse away. Elder Zhao coldly looked at me, as if he had seen through my intentions. Then, he ordered the tournament to continue. The competition of the top 10 became the competition of the top 9. When the 8 people returned to the arena, the way they looked at me changed. Although they couldn't use their corpse puppets to fight, their faces were still filled with fear. Chun Fenglin was recognized as the strongest person in the second discipline group. But even the strongest person couldn't withstand a single move from the sacrificial evil spirit. No matter how famous my corpse puppets were, they couldn't compare to the terrifying scene that was being displayed in front of them. Looking at their expressions, I coldly smiled and directly said, "Senior brothers, listen carefully. I am determined to obtain first place in this tournament. If any of the senior brothers blocks my path, I will fight to the death with them after the tournament is over." After busying myself for half a day and sacrificing Chun Fenglin's life, my goal was to frighten this group of people. I didn't want to reveal my cultivation, but I also wanted to obtain the qualifications to enter the Heavenly Yin Cave. This was the only way. Just as I predicted, after hearing my words, none of the 8 corpse sect disciples dared to respond or refute me. Not only them, but even Suing Xiu and the others on the platform silently looked at the sacrificial evil spirit with a trace of horror in their eyes. Needless to say, I already knew what they were thinking. Chun Fenglin and his corpse puppets were at least at the peak of the glorious knowledge realm. Even an ordinary Heaven's Master wouldn't be able to deal with them as easily as the sacrificial evil spirit. In other words, they suddenly discovered that they weren't necessarily the sacrificial evil spirit's opponent. Chapter 435. The corpse sect had always followed the rule of the strong preying on the weak. Everything was based on the result. Even though I used intimidation and almost completely ignored the rules of the competition, in the end, no one refuted me. Even the 3 elders on the rostrum had gloomy expressions and didn't question the final result. Everything was settled. Elder Zhao soon officially announced the final result. Then, he informed all the top 3 disciples of each group to gather at the Flying Zombie Cave at midnight. Then, they would enter the Heavenly Yin Cave where the ancestor resided to cultivate. I was a little surprised. The competition had just ended, but they wanted to go to the Heavenly Yin Cave at night? Wasn't a little too hasty? However, after thinking about it, I understood. Today was the Hungry Ghost Festival, and tonight would be the time when the ancestor would wake up. I took a deep breath and steadied my mind. Since I had come this far, I had to go to the heavenly cave no matter what. I wanted to see the heavenly Tao's corpse and the mysterious ancestor's true appearance. The disciples of the corpse sect quickly dispersed. I jumped off the arena and followed the crowd back to my cave mansion. It was currently afternoon, and there were still 6 hours before midnight. I decided to go to Jiang Dongqing's place first to confirm tonight's operation and the connection signal. Jiang Dongqing couldn't enter the heavenly cave with me, so he could only hide in the energy passage. However, the energy in the passage was very strong, so I couldn't be sure if he could receive my signal or not. In the end, Tong Tong gave his long whip of Shi to Jiang Dongqing. Once he was in danger, Tong Tong could ignore the Shi in the Shi passage and send a message to his soul celestial device, which was the long whip of Shi. Jiang Dongqing could then receive the message. After everything was settled, I returned to my cave mansion and sat cross-legged to adjust my breathing. I wanted to maintain my peak condition when we entered the heavenly cave. Time ticked by. Around 1 hour later, I suddenly heard a soft sound from the door. This sound was very faint, and even with my current cultivation base, I couldn't hear it clearly. If I hadn't been cultivating, I wouldn't have been able to hear it. I opened my eyes. Before I could look at the door, I was bewildered. I didn't know when Yuanming had appeared in my room. He stood in front of me and looked down at me. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to have just woken up. It stood not far from me and coldly stared at me, its face solemn. After a moment of astonishment, I quickly calmed down. During today's competition, Yuanming asked Su Yingxiu to change the rules, which proved that he didn't want me to enter the heavenly cave. He didn't stop me at that time, so it was normal for him to come here personally. Moreover, his goal was most likely to get rid of me. After looking at each other for a while, Yuanming frowned and said, "How did you find me? A warning from the corpse puppet?" With my cultivation, it was naturally impossible for me to detect the traces of a celestial master. Yuanming couldn't help but be surprised. I smiled. I was able to discover it because my cultivation is high enough. Cultivation? Yuanming's eyelids twitched and his eyebrows furrowed even tighter, as though he wanted to see through me. I exhaled and retracted the witchcraft aura in my body. Then, I stood in front of Yuanming and stared at him coldly. He didn't come with good intentions today. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to escape from a bloody battle, so there was no need for me to conceal my cultivation. My indifferent attitude made Yuanming's gaze turn solemn. After staying silent for a while, he spoke again. "I'm a celestial master. Without reaching the celestial master realm, it's impossible for you to detect my whereabouts. Could it be that you have the cultivation of a celestial master?" I looked at him in silence and smiled without saying a word. Yuanming finally couldn't maintain his indifferent attitude. His eyelids twitched and his skinny body straightened. A fierce aura burst forth from his body as he shouted, "Who are you?" As soon as he finished talking, he swung his palm toward my face. A celestial master's cultivation was terrifying. He didn't need any Shin technique to carry the power of heaven and earth with his every move. His simple palm strike stirred up a gust of wind that overturned the bed behind me. The moment he attacked, I raised my right leg and performed the 8th step of the 9-star heavenly dipper. The witchcraft aura in my body circulated rapidly and accumulated in my left arm to block his palm. Yuanming's palm didn't look fast, but it was actually extremely fast. I had to raise my arm as fast as I could to block his palm. When my palm and arm collided, there was a loud thud in the air, as though there was a sonic boom. In the next second, my body trembled and I was sent flying. I hit the stone wall behind me and fell to the ground. I couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of sweet blood. I lowered my head and saw that the lower part of my left arm was bent at a weird angle. It was obvious that the bone was broken. During the process of cultivation, as my cultivation increased, the muscles and bones in my body were nourished by the power and were already extremely tough. Moreover, I'd already gathered the witchcraft aura in my left arm. I thought that I would definitely be able to block his palm, but I didn't think that Yuanming's power would be so tyrannical. I couldn't help but smile wryly. After completing the 8th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, I felt that I had the ability to fight against a celestial master. That was why I didn't use the evil sacrificial spirit, nor did I summon the snake spirit and Tong Tong. I wanted to borrow Yu Wenming's power to test my current cultivation. I even calculated the possibility of winning. Only now did I understand that there were differences in the celestial master realm. Yu Wenming was ranked second among the 9 elders of the corpse sect, so his power wasn't far from the Yang God celestial masters. I had overestimated myself and underestimated the heroes of the world. After severely injuring me with one palm, Yu Wenming didn't chase after me. He still stood at the same spot and coldly stared at me. His expression didn't ease, but became even more serious. He asked again, "You only have the cultivation of the glory of knowledge, but you were able to block my palm. Who are you?" I coughed and spat out the blood in my mouth. I ignored his question and asked, "You wanted to kill me to hide the Tao Tai technique, but during the competition, the entire corpse sect witnessed the Tao Tai technique. When the old ancestor comes out, he will definitely know about it. Yin Dongyue also advised you against it. So why did you take the unnecessary action to kill me?" I did have some doubts in my heart as I had heard the conversation between him and Yin Dongyue. Even if Yu Wenming killed me, he wouldn't be able to hide this news, so I didn't think about it. However, I didn't think that his actions were completely different from what I had expected. Hearing my words, Yu Wenming's expression changed drastically. "You? Who are you?" This time, his face wasn't just filled with pure anger. His face was completely distorted, and I could clearly feel his body violently trembling. His voice was filled with fear, as if he was a madman on the verge of collapse. I suddenly understood. Yu Wenming had stopped me from participating in the tournament, as well as ambushing me, not because of some unforeseen event that I didn't know about, but because his emotions had completely collapsed. He was like the final madness of a dying person, completely without reason or logic. That old ancestor, was he really that terrifying? Yu Wenming said that once the old ancestor knew about the Tao Tai technique, the thousands of corpse sect disciples would all die. Could it be true? Without waiting for me to understand, Yu Wenming's entire body trembled as he approached me step by step. He said in a shrill and fearful voice, "Tell me, who are you? If you don't tell me clearly, I will definitely send you into the soul-devouring cave and let you suffer the pain of having your soul devoured." I shook my head with a wry smile. When we were fighting, I didn't try to hide it, so Yu Wenming could definitely feel that I had used my Dao Qi. The soul-devouring cave was no different from a heavenly paradise to me. His words at this moment only proved that he had completely lost his mind. As the corpse sect master, it was really sad for him to be in such a state because of something that hadn't happened yet. Chapter 436. The crazed Yu Wenming gazed at me. He didn't care about what was behind him. When the evil sacrificial spirit pressed his finger, he froze in midair. The thick yin energy in his hand shook and dispersed. Only his bloodshot eyes didn't change. However, the light in his eyes had disappeared. After a few seconds of silence, his body slumped to the ground. When I was in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty, I had witnessed the death of many celestial masters. When I got out of there, I saw the bodies of around 20 celestial masters or young god celestial masters. However, it was the first time I'd seen someone die in front of me. Looking at Yu Wenming's body, I suddenly remembered the gate of eternal life that the celestial masters had mentioned in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. The celestial masters were almost like gods, but their lives were still so fragile. Did eternal life really exist? The so-called gate of eternal life. And behind the gate was eternal life? While my mind was running wild, the evil sacrificial spirit walked toward me. First, he scanned the cut on my arm. Then, he said to me, "This man cultivates yin energy. I can use the Tao Tai technique to swallow the half-formed young god in his body to increase my cultivation base." After listening to him, I was bewildered for a while. The evil sacrificial spirit was asking me for my permission. I had always been in awe of the evil, sacrificial spirit. Normally, I wouldn't give him any orders. But now, his behavior made me feel awkward. However, it was also his behavior that confirmed my identity in my previous life. I could feel the reverence and obedience the evil, sacrificial spirit had for me. This reverence and obedience was even stronger than his pupils. It was like an innate nature that had been engraved in his soul for a long time. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't tell me the relationship between him and me in my previous life, but I could guess that we had a close relationship. I gave him a slight nod. The evil sacrificial spirit picked up Yu Wenming's body. He opened his mouth and sucked at the Baihui area above his head. A jet of dark liquid flew out of his scalp. The evil sacrificial spirit swallowed it all at once. The whole process was so fast that I didn't even see what the so-called half-formed yang spirit was. After swallowing, the yin energy on Yu Wenming's body was all gone. Nothing was left. The evil sacrificial spirit sat down cross-legged and told me that he needed 1 hour to digest the energy. After that, he would recover a lot of his power. He's my biggest reliance. If his ability can be improved, I'll have more confidence in this trip to the Heavenly Yin Cave. Of course, I couldn't slack off. I also sat down cross-legged and continued to meditate. As long as my arm is nourished by Taoist Qi, it could be completely healed within a short period of time. However, not only did Yu Wenming's attack just now break my arm, but it also dispersed the witchcraft and Taoist Qi in my body. It will take some time for me to gather them again. There were only 2 hours left before the ion timer. I pulled myself together and tried to recover as fast as I could. Fortunately, I had the yin energy of the corpse sect to replenish my shaman energy and the true dragon's vein in the jade bracelet to replenish my Tao energy. Around 10 minutes before the time limit, I had fully recovered my shaman and Tao energies. I didn't stay any longer. I didn't even deal with Yu Wenming's body and directly headed to the Flying Zombie Cave. When I arrived at the Flying Zombie Cave, the 9 elders of the corpse sect, aside from Yin Dongyue and Yu Wenming, who died in my cave, were all there. The 9 winners of the competition had already gathered. After I arrived, Elder Zhao, who had been in charge of this matter, walked in front of a stone door in the Flying Zombie Hall and said in a clear voice, "It's almost midnight. Everyone, follow me into the sacred grounds of the sect. Remember not to make any noise." With that, he was about to push the stone door open when Su Yingxiu suddenly said, "Wait." Everyone's movements froze. Elder Zhao stopped, turned around, and asked with a frown, "What is it?" Su Yingxiu said, "The sect master hasn't arrived yet. We might as well wait for a while." Elder Zhao was silent for a moment, but he immediately replied, "It's almost midnight. The sect master will definitely arrive soon. We can't delay the time to welcome the ancestor. We should go in first." With that, he didn't wait for Su Yingxiu to speak again and directly pushed open the huge stone door, revealing a small path that led downwards. He took the first step and then turned around to beckon everyone to follow him. I followed the crowd all the way. After entering, I found that this place was next to the stone wall that separated the Tianyin cave. At this time, there were less than 10 minutes left before the ion timer. Everyone was solemnly facing the stone wall with their heads lowered. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. It wasn't just the corpse sect disciples. Even Elder Zhao and the other elders were the same. Only one person was an exception. He didn't look at the stone wall, but turned his head to look at me out of the corner of his eye. There was a trace of surprise on his face. Actually, when I was outside, he kept looking at me. I reckoned that he knew that Yu Wenming had gone to find me, so he was bewildered as to why I was still here. Yu Wenming had already been killed. Even if Su Yingxiu knew about it, he wouldn't be able to cause much of a storm. I didn't care about it at all. All of my thoughts were focused on the Tianyin cave as I stared at the stone wall in front of me. On the stone wall, there were many holes filled with purple plant roots. When Yin Nantian and I went in, we dug out one of the roots and directly went in. When I returned to the corpse sect this time, I didn't dare to approach the ancestor because I knew that he was in the Tianyin cave. It was only now that I saw the holes and the roots again. Looking at the roots, I vaguely felt that it was different from the last time. The last time I saw the roots, I only felt that they were a bit bigger. Apart from that, they were no different from other plant roots. But this time, I found that there was a layer of black light covering the roots. It faintly emitted a metallic luster, as if they weren't real plant roots, but rather patterns carved on the stone. Inexplicably, I felt that the roots had become very hard, perhaps even harder than the stone wall. Now, it would be impossible to dig out the roots and get in. I guessed that this situation was related to the ancestor. It was most likely because the ancestor was inside that the roots had become like this. Bored, Lin Fan stared at the thick plant roots. Time passed second by second, and soon it was the midnight hour. Elder Zhao was the first to raise his head. He first looked around, then without saying a word, he lifted his foot and walked in front of the stone wall. He held a black stone in his hand and placed it in a small hole on the stone wall. As soon as he put it in, the stone wall slightly trembled twice. Then, a stone on the dark mountain wall caved in, and a huge square hole appeared there. It seemed to be a secret passage leading to the Tianyin cave. I craned my neck to take a look. It was dark inside the cave, and I couldn't see anything. As for Elder Zhao, he didn't even dare to look. Instead, he quickly retreated a few steps and turned his head towards us. It's midnight. The 9 of you, quickly line up and enter. The 9 winners of the tournament had lined up to welcome the guests. As soon as they heard him, the people of the 4th discipline group took the lead and walked over. I was about to follow the crowd, but right at this moment, Su Yingxiu hurried toward Elder Zhao. He looked worried as if something had happened. I glanced over and didn't think too much about it. However, the moment I shifted my gaze, I heard a horrible shriek. In this quiet environment, the sudden shriek made everyone stop and look in that direction suspiciously. I then saw a dagger in Elder Zhao's lower abdomen. His eyes didn't have a beam of life. He leaned against the stone wall and slowly slid to the ground. Su Yingxiu, who was standing to the side, had a strange smile on his face. He raised his head and looked at the secret passage. Without waiting for me to react, a few more screams came from behind me. I quickly turned around and saw that one of the corpse sex elders was already lying on the ground. There were 2 other elders besieging another person. That person was also seriously injured. He angrily roared while struggling to hold on. Only my chief teacher, Lin Shui, was standing to the side in a daze. She didn't seem to understand what had happened. What's going on? Is there an internal conflict in the corpse sect? Why did they choose this critical moment? Could it be some kind of conspiracy? Before I could figure it out, I saw a figure rushing toward me. I looked carefully and saw that it was Jiang Dongcheng. Chapter 437. The sudden change made me completely dumbfounded. I wasn't the only one. The other winners of the competition were also stunned. They turned their heads to look at the internal conflict between the elders. They didn't know what to do. Not long after, the besieged corpse sect elder was completely outnumbered and was beheaded. His corpse fell to the ground, and his corpse puppet also fell to the ground after its master died. The 2 people who attacked turned to look at the dumbfounded Lin Shui and unhesitatingly took out their magic tools. I couldn't bear to do it, but the current situation was strange, and Lin Shui wasn't someone who cared too much about me. After thinking for a while, I stood still and remained vigilant. I was prepared to summon the snake spirit and Tong Tong at any time. As the 2 of them attacked Lin Shui, the corpse puppet standing beside her suddenly let out a roar and reached out to grab Lin Shui. Her body turned into a streak of purple light and flew toward the entrance of the cave they had come from. Her speed could be said to be peerless. Before anyone could react, her figure had already disappeared from the entrance of the cave. When she used the purple Chun corpse sect to spy on the sacrificial evil spirit, I knew that she wasn't ordinary, but I didn't think that she would have such a divine ability. The 2 people still wanted to chase after her, but Su Yingxiu, who was standing not far from me, suddenly called out, "2 senior brothers, don't chase after her. The passage has already been opened. There's less than half an hour before that old monster awakens. We can't waste time chasing after her. That girl won't be able to cause any trouble. It's more important for us to quickly go in and set up the formation." After saying that, He didn't wait for the two to answer and turned his head to Jiang Dongsheng, who was standing in the distance, and said, "Little junior brother, you also came with us? You don't need to panic. The three of us are your senior brothers from the same sect. Master has already told us about your news. The three of us have been in the corpse sect for at least 30 years. You might have some doubts about our identities, but you should know about our sect's keepsakes." After hearing his words, I was completely dumbfounded. This Su Yingxiu and the two elders of the Corpsine sect were all Jiang Dongqing's senior brothers. In other words, they were also the disciples of the old leader. How was this possible? Jiang Dongqing's reaction was about the same as mine. He stood there with his eyes wide open, his mouth open for a long time, but he couldn't say a word. Su Yingxiu nodded towards the other two elders before the three of them simultaneously took out a folding fan and threw it in front of them. Following that, I saw an even more inconceivable scene. The moment the folding fan left his hand, it transformed into a lonely mound. There was no tombstone on the mound, only scattered yellow weeds covering it. It looked desolate and dilapidated. I couldn't be more familiar with this map of Lonely Tomb's lone grave. My square heaven fan is the magical artifact that the old president gave me. When I use it, it transforms exactly the same map of Lonely Tomb's lone grave. Su Yingxiu said that this was their sect's token. What did that mean? According to what he said, I'm also a member of his sect? I'm also a disciple of the old leader? My mind was in a mess. On the other side, Jiang Dongqing's eyes lit up. He also took out a folding fan, but he didn't take out this magical artifact. Instead, he quickly walked over and excitedly said to Su Yingxiu, "Elder Su, no, senior martial brother, Master told me that I have 5 people from the same sect. There are 3 senior martial brothers above me. Eldest senior martial brother is surnamed Chun and is a bookworm. Second senior martial brother is surnamed Su and is a destitute butcher. Third senior martial brother is surnamed Juga and is a drunkard who loves wine as much as his life. You are my second senior martial brother?" Just as he finished speaking, and before Su Yingxiu could reply, one of the 2 corpse sect elders standing behind him laughed loudly. "Ha, Master's right. I, your father, am a drunkard who loves wine as much as my life." Ha! When second senior martial brother was brought back by Master, he was indeed a destitute butcher. Eldest senior martial brother. Eldest senior martial brother is a bookworm who can't even fart after being beaten 3 times. But he is also a scholar. Ha! Junior martial brother, what did Master say about you? Jiang Dongsheng embarrassedly smiled and said, "Master said I'm a 1 in 10,000 genius." Ha! Just as he finished speaking, Su Yingxiu and the others all burst into laughter. After a long time, Su Yingxiu stopped laughing and said, "Master is really biased. If we're not bookworms, then we're drunkards, but you're a genius." Ha! Since Master said that, then you really are a 1 in 10,000 genius. Jiang Dongxing looked like he didn't know what to say. He awkwardly laughed for a while before suddenly withdrawing his smile and asking, "That's right, second senior martial brother. There is something I have to tell you. Before, I didn't know your identity. Sui was killed by me. At that time, he inexplicably attacked me. I didn't know what to do, so Sui." Su Yingxiu interrupted him and shook his head. "He isn't my son. He's just an orphan that I brought back from the outside. I gave him a name and raised him as my son, but that was just to hide my identity. There's no need to mention him anymore." After saying that with a slightly regretful tone, Su Yingxiu immediately pushed this matter to the side and continued to ask Jiang Dongqing, "You just said that you have 5 fellow disciples. From the looks of it, besides you, Master also accepted 2 other disciples? Who are those 2 junior martial brothers?" "Them." Jiang Dongsheng let out a sigh of relief. When he heard Su Yingxiu's question, a smile appeared on his face again. He turned his gaze and looked at me. "Ha! Master accepted 2 other disciples. One of them usually calls him grandparent and grandchild. She's not a junior martial brother, but a junior martial sister. Her name is Yi Piampian, a famous beauty in our metaphysics society." "Yi Piampian?" Su Yingxiu shook his head. "This girl, I know her. Let's not talk about her for now. let's talk about the other junior martial brother. Su Yingxiu's reaction was a bit strange, but Jiang Dongqing didn't care about it because he was too excited. The smile on his face became even wider. He pointed at me and said, "The other junior apprentice brother is right beside senior apprentice brother." Ha! Su Yingxiu was stunned. Then he followed his gaze and turned his head. After staring at me, he suddenly frowned. Him? Jiang Dongqing nodded with a smile. That's right. It's him. Master's last disciple. Su Yingxiu wasn't as close to Jiang Dongqing as before. He frowned and stared at me. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "Wang Lin, I know your name isn't Wang Lin. You use a technique to hide your appearance, so I could see through it. However, even though I know that there's something strange about you, I can't see any clues. Who are you? Are you that Zhou Yi that was chased by Dragon Tiger Mountain?" I stood at the same spot for a long time and gradually recovered from the shock. However, looking at Su Yingxiu and the others in front of me, it was difficult for me to feel close to them like I did to Jiang Dongsheng. After Su Yingxiu asked so many questions, I pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, "I'm Zhou Yi. I also have the sect token you mentioned, but the old president. I haven't met him, nor have I taken him as my master." Su Yingxiu shook his head. "Since you have the sect's keepsake, you are naturally from the same sect. Zhou Yi, although master has not told me about you. Since you have the sect's keepsake and have appeared here at this time, it must be master's arrangement." His words made me a bit confused. My appearance here was arranged by the old president? I thought about it. There were many reasons that led me to the Corpsine sect. How could it be arranged by the old president? How is this possible? Without waiting for me to understand, Su Yingxiu let out a breath, turned around, and said to everyone in a clear voice, "Master has painstakingly arranged for so many years. Everything was for today. Our martial arts, and even our lives were given to us by Master. Today, we must complete Master's order. Eldest senior brother and junior brothers, follow me in." After saying that, he turned around and casually waved his hand. A streak of sword light flashed, and the few winners standing beside me were decapitated at the same time, dying on the spot. Then, Su Yingxiu did not stop at all. He walked into the square passage first, and the others followed suit. Chapter 438. At this moment, although the situation in the Tianyin cave had changed greatly, my strength wasn't affected. No matter what the old president arranged for these people to do, it was fine as long as they didn't hinder me. Of course, I wasn't an ungrateful person. The old president had helped me before, and the purpose of joining them conflicted with mine. If I could retreat, I would try my best to give in. I would just take one step at a time. As everyone walked into the cave, I looked up. The situation in the cave was the same as the last time I saw it. In the huge cave, a huge corpse floated in the middle. When I saw it last time, I only felt that the corpse was huge, but I didn't feel anything directly. But this time, I couldn't help but compare Xiao Jin's body with it. I found that this corpse was actually a bit bigger than Xiao Jin's body. So far, I had only seen Tai Sui with such a huge body, but I couldn't determine that this giant corpse was Tai Sui because of this. There had to be other evidence. This was the second time I saw this giant corpse, but it was obviously the first time that Su Yingxiu, Jiang Dongsheng, and the others had seen such a strange situation. They were all stunned on the spot, looking up at the giant corpse and the purple plant on it in disbelief. After half a minute, they finally came back to their senses. Su Yingxiu was the first to speak. He sighed as he pointed at the giant corpse and said, "This should be the heaven's corpse that Master mentioned. I'll have to trouble Big Shi Xiang to be on guard here. Third Shitty, Little Shitty, and Zhou Yi, follow me." After saying that, he didn't stop and walked towards the giant corpse. When I heard that, I was stunned. It was normal for him to give orders to his fellow disciples, but why was he ordering me around so directly? It was fine if he treated me as a shitty, but from the way he called me, I could tell that he didn't treat me as a shitty. After hesitating for a moment, I still followed him. No matter if Su Yingxiu called me or not, I had to go to the giant corpse to check it out. Halfway there, Jiang Dongsheng came over to me and said to me with a smile, Little shitty. Since you have a square sky fan, the mission that Master arranged for you to come here must be the same as ours. Why didn't you tell me directly last time? Mission? I shook my head. I told you that I have never met the old president. He has never given me any missions either. The smile on Jiang Dongqing's face disappeared, and he asked suspiciously, "How is this possible? Master arranged for us to hide our names in the corpse sect and stay there for several years, or even decades. Our goal was to eliminate the ancestor of the corpse sect, and this Fong Tian fan is the key to eliminating the ancestor. Master didn't even give you a mission and directly gave you the Fong Tian fan? Master isn't that muddle-headed." I was bewildered. Their goal was to kill the old ancestor. It was within my range of guesses, so it wasn't strange at all. However, the square sky fan was the key to getting rid of the ancestor, which puzzled me. Jiang Dongqing's question was very reasonable. The old president had been scheming for so many years, so he must have done things without any mistakes. However, he handed the Fong Tian fan to me and never mentioned this matter to me. Wasn't this a sign of muddle-headedness? I helplessly shook my head. After being silent for a moment, I replied, "I owe the old president a favor. If you need my square sky fan, or if you need my help, I'll be duty-bound. However, the old man has never mentioned this matter to me, nor has he given me any mission." After hearing what I said, the suspicion on Jiang Dongqing's face finally disappeared, but he still had a puzzled expression. After a while, he said, "To get rid of the ancestor, all 4 square sky fans must be used. Moreover, the person who wields the square sky fan must personally take action." Xiao Shi. "Forget it. I won't call you junior brother anymore. I'll call you Joey, no matter what. Thank you for today." I nodded and didn't say anything. There were many mysteries that had been troubling me, such as Xiao Jin, the snake spirit, and Nangong. However, among these people, the one I couldn't understand the most was the old president. Although there were many things that I still didn't understand about Xiao Jin, Nangong, and the others, there were always some clues to what they did. However, the old president was different. He had been by my side for a long time, but now I didn't even know what he looked like, let alone what his purpose was or what relationship he had with me. Especially this time, he used the excuse of admiring an ordinary magic tool that I had casually given him, but it turned out to be such an important thing. If he had set up today's trap, then how terrifying of a person was he? What I didn't understand was, where did he get the confidence to predict that I would come here today? In the world of metaphysics, the 3 schools of Taoism, Buddhism, and mysticism all had their own methods of divination. However, there were 50 ways of divination, and nothing was absolute. Even if the old president's cultivation was exceedingly high, I didn't believe that he could accurately predict today's events. If he didn't rely on divination, then what did he rely on? I couldn't help but recall the process of me rushing to the corpse sect. At first, because of the strange deaths of the 18 heavenly masters in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum, I became a suspect and was chased by Mount Longhu. I struggled to escape, but in the end, I had no choice but to hide in the corpse sect. If all of this was secretly controlled by someone, then he must have started from the source. Could it be that the 18 heavenly masters in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum all died in the hands of the old president? He killed all of them and even took away that woman. Then, he let me go alone, so the eyes of all the forces must have focused on me. Then, I ran all the way. If he knew everything about me, then it wasn't impossible for him to predict that I would come to the corpse sect. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became, and the more I felt that it was possible. But even if it was the truth, there was still one thing I didn't understand. The old president had done so much to cultivate so many outstanding disciples that outsiders didn't know about. He had been planning this for many years, and he had finally forced me to come here. So many years of hard work and planning. And the final goal was to kill the corpse sect's ancestor? What kind of grudge was there between them? If there really was such a deep blood feud, why didn't he come in person? I didn't know how his cultivation was compared to the corpse sect's ancestor, but he was much stronger than us. Wouldn't he be more confident in doing these things himself? I couldn't understand these questions, so I wanted to ask Jiang Dongqing. But at this time, we had already walked under the giant corpse. Su looked up at the giant corpse and immediately said, "There is a square mark on this heavenly Tao corpse's arms and legs. Do you see it?" According to what he said, I looked up and found that there was a symmetrical mark on the two upper arms and two thighs of the giant corpse. The shape was about a flat gray square, and it was very clear on the skin that was completely covered by the purple and blue plants. After we found the mark, Su said, "I'll be responsible for the left arm. Third brother, you'll be responsible for the right arm. Junior brother, you'll be responsible for the left leg. And Joe-E, you'll be responsible for the right leg. In about a minute, that old thing will come out from these four directions. Once that old thing appears, we will simultaneously activate the square sky fan and use the lonely grave to suppress him. Do you understand?" Not only did I not understand, I was completely confused. He said that the old thing was the ancestor. Why did he want to suppress him from four directions? And I was very clear about the power of the square sky fan. Not to mention dealing with the ancestor. Even if he used the four square sky fans to deal with me, I would still be able to easily deal with him. Could he suppress the ancestor with just the four square sky fans? My heart was full of questions, so I didn't have time to ask them. Su quickly shouted, "He's coming out. Everyone be on guard." I immediately swallowed my words and quickly became alert. Like the three of them, I held the square sky fan in my hand and waited with rapt attention. Almost in an instant, the purple and blue plants on the giant corpse's body suddenly trembled. The giant corpse was originally shrinking along with the plants, so this change was even greater. After about 3 or 4 times, the 4 marks on the giant corpse's arms and legs suddenly exploded with a bang. There was no blood or flesh scattered, but 4 small cauldrons flew out of the 4 marks. Seeing this, my eyes opened wide. These 4 small cauldrons were exactly the same as the 2 cauldrons I'd seen in Meizhou and Guangzhou. Before I could react, the small cauldrons suddenly emitted a large amount of thick black smoke. It was a type of extremely thick Yin energy. Accompanied by this Yin energy were 4 corpses that emerged out of thin air. What was even stranger was that the 4 corpses looked exactly the same. Could it be that this corpse was the ancestor? Su didn't give me time to think. He suddenly shouted, "Now, do it!" As soon as he said that, the square sky fan in his hand disappeared. A picture of a lonely grave appeared out of thin air, directly suppressing the corpse in his left arm. Chapter 439. When the 4 paintings appeared, the 4 corpses floating in the air seemed to sense something. Their bodies trembled crazily. Unfortunately, the black mist surrounding them seemed to have a terrifying suction force. No matter how much they struggled, their bodies were still wrapped in the black mist and couldn't budge an inch. They couldn't move, but the 4 paintings were extremely fast. Under our control, they quickly moved towards the 4 corpses to suppress them. Based on my past experience, after the lone grave and the square sky fan appears, I must activate the wild grass on the lone grave and make it entangle and control the enemy. Only then will I be able to achieve the best results. At this moment, I was doing the same thing. I crazily circulated the Tao Qi in my body and sent it towards the weeds on the graves. However, the strange thing was that no matter how much Tao Qi I sent, the weeds on the graves didn't move at all. It was completely different from before. I was surprised and thought that there was something wrong with my heavenly fan. However, when I looked around, I saw that the other 3's situation was similar to mine. There was no sign of weeds growing crazily. There were only 4 large graves that were falling towards the 4 corpses. Su didn't say anything. It seemed that this wasn't a big problem, so I didn't think too much about it. I just stared at the corpses in front of me. Soon, the 4 graves came crashing down and covered the 4 corpses at practically the same time. Because the graves were illusory, they didn't stop after pressing down on the 4 corpses. Instead, they slowly pressed down until the 4 corpses were completely covered. The entire process was very fast. From the moment we activated the heavenly fan until now, only 10 seconds had passed. I didn't dare to believe it. Were these 4 corpses really the corpse sex ancestor? How could they be so easily dealt with by us? Although Suing Tsiu and the others were arranged here by the old president to deal with this old ancestor, and that square heaven fan was very likely to be specially used to deal with this old ancestor. But even so, to be able to deal with him in a short 10 seconds seemed like child's play. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't the only one who couldn't believe it. I lifted my head to look at Suing Tsiu and the others. Their expressions weren't much different from mine. 2 minutes passed, and the 4 corpses in the lonely grave map didn't move. I exhaled and was about to turn to ask Suing Tsiu about the situation. However, right at this moment, something strange happened. Suddenly, a low and deep voice resounded in the Tianyin cave, which had been abnormally quiet. This sound was obviously a human's. It sounded like someone was chanting. The 4 of us slightly paled and turned to look around to find the source of the sound. However, we quickly withdrew our gazes because the 4 graves in front of us had also changed. I didn't know when the 4 graves had started to emit black smoke. When we first noticed it, the smoke was very faint. However, after a few seconds, it thickened. It reminded me of the smoke that had covered the 4 corpses. I couldn't help but think of the black smoke that had shrouded the 4 corpses. But after a few seconds, the smoke thickened. It reminded me of the black smoke that had covered the 4 corpses. But now, the black smoke suddenly came out on its own. Then, did something happen to the 4 corpses? As soon as I had this thought, I saw the bottom of the grave in front of me crack open, revealing a big hole. Before I could react, the corpses that had been wrapped inside the grave crawled out of the hole. Not only that, but the corpses that had just crawled out had changed a lot. Previously, the corpse had been floating in the air. However, after escaping from the lone grave, the corpse stood upright in midair. Its eyes, which were originally closed, had opened at some point in time. I lifted my head and looked at the corpse. Then I was shaken. There was a saying that said, "Close your eyes and you die. Open your eyes and you live." The eyes were where the spirit energy of a living creature was stored. They were also the place where vitality was the strongest. However, when the corpse in front of me opened his eyes, I didn't feel that he had come back to life. Quite the contrary, his eyes were dim and yellow, as if they had been decaying for a long time. This feeling was like looking at a piece of toilet paper that had been decaying for tens of thousands of years. If the wind blew, it would shatter and turn it into ashes. Apart from the strange gaze, the corpse's mouth was still slightly open. The low moan that seemed to appear out of nowhere just now came from his mouth. At first glance, it sounded like he was mumbling. However, as I was staring at his lips from a close distance, I gradually understood. The corpse in front of me seemed to be mumbling a word, but I couldn't tell what it was. It sounded like King or Buzz. What is it? A spell? Did this corpse use some kind of Taoist technique? I was cautious and kept my eyes on the surroundings. At the same time, I was ready to call the eyes and the snake spirit. I didn't know if the evil, sacrificial spirit saw my strange expression, but it suddenly jumped in front of me. It gazed at the corpse and frowned. I didn't know what it was thinking. It was Suing Tsiu's team's goal to subdue this ancestor. I was just helping them. These 4 corpses were extremely strange. If it wasn't necessary, I didn't want to fight them. I hurried to call the evil, sacrificial spirit and asked him to retreat. However, the evil, sacrificial spirit didn't seem to hear me. No matter how hard I called him, he didn't move an inch. I was worried. If this ancestor went crazy, the evil, sacrificial spirit would become cannon fodder. I gritted my teeth and walked toward the evil, sacrificial spirit. I wanted to pull him back. However, just as I moved, before I could even lift my leg, Suing Tsiu, who was standing not far away from me, finally spoke. His voice was calm. He lowered his voice and said to us, "This old thing just got rid of the seal. Guys, don't panic. Listen to my command." After saying that, he didn't care about us. Instead, he turned to the scholars standing in the distance and said, "Senior, it's up to you now." The 2 of them clearly had a plan in mind. As soon as he finished speaking, the scholar in the distance took out a long wooden plank-like object. This wooden plank was black and around 1 meter long. I didn't know how the scholar had hidden it on his body. After taking out the black plank, the scholar walked toward us. His steps weren't fast or slow, but after 2 strides, he passed us and stood in front of the corpses. I gawked. No wonder this scholar was the eldest disciple of the president. His power wasn't ordinary at all. It was just 2 steps, but it looked no different from an immortal's technique called ground shrink. Not only was I shocked by his magical technique, but I was also frightened by the black plank in his hand. When I got close to it, I saw that it wasn't a plank, but a tombstone. In the metaphysics world, anything could happen. Perhaps someone had refined a tombstone and turned it into a magic tool. It wasn't a big deal. But the problem was that the tombstone in his hand had a line of big words on it. Lili Guang's tomb. Lili Guang. That was the name of the president. Why did the tombstone say Tomb of the President? Could it be that the old president was already dead? How is it possible? With the president's status, if he died, the entire metaphysics world would be shaken. How could there be no news about it? But if the president was still alive, why would this scholar, the eldest disciple of the president, carry a tombstone with his teacher's name on it? My mind was in a mess, but the others didn't react, especially the scholar. He didn't stop and walk to the 4 corpses. He threw the tombstone in his hand toward the 4 corpses. At the same time, Suingtu shouted, "Square Sky Fan, please suppress them." I instinctively took out the Square Sky Fan again. For lonely tombstones appeared in the air again. Just like before, they pressed down on the 4 corpses. This time, the reactions of the 4 corpses were completely different. A faint smile even appeared on their withered faces at the same time. Their bodies stood straight, and the strange whispers from their mouths became louder and clearer. Then, I finally understood that the corpse in front of me was chanting a syllable similar to the word Wang. I turned my head to the side and heard the voices of the other 3 corpses. Suingtu, facing the corpse, was chanting a syllable similar to the word Zhou. The huge drunkard, facing the corpse, was chanting a Wu syllable. Jiang Dongcheng, facing the corpse, was chanting a Zheng syllable. When I first heard them, I didn't feel anything. But after hearing all 4 voices, my heart was shaken. Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang, Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang, Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang. At that moment, I remembered that on the Yellow Crown Mountain in Kaifeng, when Jinren Guan asked the fatty to help me suppress the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, he gave me a note in the wooden box containing the 5 emperor's coins. There was a paragraph written on that note. Zhou Wu, Zheng, Wang are all absurd. Barren tomb, flesh mound, endless scriptures. Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang. I thought that this was a sentence in the opening of the 100 family names, but I didn't expect to hear it again from the 4 corpses in the Yin Corpse sect. Could it be that the purpose of Jinren Guan's note was to warn me about today's matter? Chapter 440. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, and King are all absurd. Barren tomb, flesh mound, endless Taoist scripture. These 4 sentences of 16 words were not difficult to understand. However, the specific meaning of the sentence could not be guessed. Zhou Wu, Zheng, and King refer to the 4 corpses in front of me. I didn't need to think too deeply about the words barren tomb, but did it refer to the solitary tomb in the sky fan? What did flesh mound mean? The most important thing was the last 4 words, endless Taoist scripture. Could it be that there was some kind of magical treasure in this heavenly cave? As I was thinking about this, the black tombstone with the old president's name and the 4 solitary tombstones all moved toward the 4 corpses. As the distance between the tombstones and the corpses got closer, the resistance from the tombstones became stronger. Success or failure depends on this. Suppress them for me. Suingtu's words made me wake up. After thinking about it for a bit, I stopped thinking about the words. No matter what, it was best to suppress the 4 corpses in the current situation. I now understand why Suingtu's group of 4 suddenly rioted and killed the elders of the corpse sect. Their goal was to arrive here before the ancestor completely awakened from his slumber and suppress him. The reason why they wanted this time was because the ancestor was too strong. From the process of the battle, Suingtu's group was right to be cautious. Earlier, the ancestor hadn't completely woken up, but he was already able to break free from the solitary tomb. Now, he was even able to fight against the four of us. It was obvious that as he became more and more awake, his strength was increasing. If we didn't get rid of him, the consequences would be hard to imagine. I didn't even know if I could survive against this old monster. Of course, I didn't use all of my trump cards. It was fine to help the old president, but it wasn't worth risking my life. Jiang Dongsheng and the others desperately sent their Tao energy into the Sky Fan. I also did my best to send my Tao energy into the Sky Fan. However, I didn't use any of my shaman energy as I quietly waited for the situation to develop. At the moment, I was only at the complete glory of knowledge cultivation. Just relying on Tao Qi, the difference between me and Su Yingxiu and the others was huge. Under the terrifying power of the tombstone, the graves that the three of them summoned were already above the heads of the three corpses. The grave in front of me was still a clear distance away from the corpses. While I was hesitating whether I should use my shaman energy or the 9 stars heavenly dipper, the 4 withered corpses moved again. Their low cries suddenly became louder. Zhou, Wu, Zheng, King. After 4 short and sharp screeches, the 4 withered corpses suddenly emitted a thick black energy. The few lone grave paintings that were about to get close to them were all sent flying. With a majestic aura, they charged towards the 4 of us. I didn't have time to think too much. The shaman energy in my body circulated, and at the same time, I used the 8th step of the 9-star heavenly dipper. Only then did I manage to block this attack. However, I felt a sweetness in my throat, and I couldn't help but spurt out a mouthful of blood. Not only me, I turned to look at Jiang Dongsheng and the others. Although they didn't spurt out blood, their expressions didn't look too good. I was shocked. It seemed that I had underestimated this old monster. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to attack, and I was already heavily injured. Once he fully recovered, I was afraid that we wouldn't be his match. Right when I wanted to retreat, the scholar standing in the front didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. The tombstone in his hand had withstood the attack and continued to press downward. As the tombstone got closer, the voices of the 4 withered corpses became more hurried, and a series of short syllables spread out. However, this time, their target was the tombstone, and they didn't implicate the others. Looking at such a scene, I temporarily suppressed my thoughts of retreating and prepared to observe for a while longer. That scholar was really amazing. Just now, the 4 withered corpses were able to force the 4 of us to retreat. But now, the scholar was withstanding the continuous roars of the 4 withered corpses and didn't have any intention of retreating. However, the 4 withered corpses weren't easy to deal with. The lower the tombstone went, the greater the resistance. When it was about 3 feet from the heads of the 4 corpses, no matter how much the scholar urged, he couldn't move it any further. The scholar suddenly laughed and didn't continue to urge the tombstone. Instead, he suddenly turned around and looked at us, who were standing behind him. He suddenly said, Junior brother, teachers for corpses must have survived the wrath of the heavens. Just relying on the barren burial mound, painting won't be enough. I will suppress them while you guys use all your strength to activate the barren burial mound painting. As long as you can suppress them in the barren burial mound painting for 15 minutes, they won't be able to escape. This is the first time I've heard this scholar speak. His voice was gentle and clear like a spring breeze. However, after he finished speaking, Su Yingxiu and the others' expressions changed, especially Su Yingxiu. His expression darkened, and he cried out involuntarily, Eldest senior brother, must it be like this? The scholar smiled and replied, We can only do this. With that, he turned around and stared at the tombstone that was only 3 feet away from the 4 corpses. Suddenly, he patted his chest and gave out an incomprehensible sound. Pump. With that sound, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. It landed right on the tombstone that was floating in midair. I instantly frowned. I didn't understand that short sound, but I could see that mouthful of fresh blood. It was obviously his blood essence. The human body had blood, which originated from the essence of nature. It was formed from food and water. The essence of nature was blood essence. The amount of essence of nature in the human body was extremely small. Even though there were more cultivators than normal people, it was still extremely limited. Normally, a celestial master would only have about 10 mouthfuls of blood essence in their body. Hence, even though the blood essence had many uses, very few people dared to spit it out. That was because after the loss of blood essence, the human body's foundation would be damaged. This kind of damage was almost permanent and hard to recover. It seemed that the scholar was going to risk his life. Just as that thought appeared in my mind, the scholar heavily struck his chest and spat out the second mouthful of blood on the tombstone. After 2 mouthfuls of blood essence, the tombstone finally pressed down. No matter how hard the 4 corpses screamed, they couldn't stop it. The situation seemed to have changed, but the scholar didn't stop. He patted his chest one more time and spat out the 3rd mouthful of blood essence. I was startled. After spitting out 3 mouthfuls of blood essence, I was afraid that the scholar's cultivation realm would drop. The situation had changed for the better. Why didn't he wait and see? Before I could figure it out, the scholar didn't stop and spat out the 4th mouthful of blood essence. Then, as if he had gone crazy, he spat out the 5th mouthful, then the 6th. Before I could react, he had spat out 12 mouthfuls of blood essence. He wasn't risking his life. He didn't want to live anymore. With the celestial master's cultivation realm, he could barely spit out 10 mouthfuls of blood essence. However, he had spat out 12 mouthfuls of blood essence. I was afraid that he had spat out all the essence of nature in his body. If he had spat out all the essence of nature, how could he still be alive? At this moment, I finally understood why Su Ying-tsiu and the others had paled after listening to the scholar's words. It turned out that the scholar had made up his mind to die. After spitting out 12 mouthfuls of blood essence, the black tombstone was dyed red. The tombstone was getting closer to the 4 corpses. No matter how hard the corpses screamed, they couldn't stop the blood-soaked tombstone. Eventually, the tombstone crossed the distance of 3 feet and stopped an inch away from the head of the corpse in the middle. In just a blink of an eye, the 4 corpses stopped screaming. Their faces and movements froze. It was as if time had stopped. Su Ying-tsiu's voice arose. With a trace of sorrow, he shouted angrily, "Use the square sky fan and suppress them." Then he took out the square sky fan in his hand. A lonely grave with a monstrous resentment smashed down on the head of the corpses in front of him. The few of us were slightly slower, but we quickly took out our lone graves and suppressed them. This time, we weren't stopped. The 4 lonely graves fell on our heads. Just like the first time, they wrapped the 4 corpses inside the graves. However, it wasn't enough to completely suppress them. Just like the scholar had said, the 4 corpses had to be suppressed inside the graves for 15 minutes. No one spoke. Everyone held their breaths and stared at the 4 graves. Time ticked by. The 4 corpses seemed to have completely disappeared, and they didn't move anymore. Soon, 15 minutes had passed. The first to make a move was still the scholar, standing at the very front. He turned around shakily. His face was extremely pale, but his voice was still gentle. There was even a smile on his face as he said to Su Ying-tsiu, Bring Fong Tianshan back and give it to the teacher. Also, bring me back as well." As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes closed and his body fell to the ground. Chapter 441. The clanking sounds of the bodies falling to the ground instantly woke up the silent crowd. Jiang Dongsheng was the first to call out eldest martial brother in a panic. Immediately after, the butcher-like fatty quickly walked over and threw himself onto the scholar's corpse, letting out bursts of sobbing. Even Su Ying-tsiu, who had always been unsmiling, walked over and knelt next to the scholar's corpse. His eyes were clearly a bit red. I stood to the side and watched this scene. I couldn't help but sigh in my heart. These disciples of the old president had been lurking in the corpse sect for decades. In the end, when they suppressed the ancestor, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice their lives. All of them could be said to be outstanding. To be able to cultivate such disciples, what kind of person was the old president? The first to recover his emotions was Su Ying-xiu. After he silently shed tears for a moment, he quickly stood up, wiped his eyes, and said in a low voice, "This time, we Marshall brothers came with the belief that if we don't succeed, we will die." Although eldest senior brother passed away, he also completed the task that Master entrusted to him. Junior brothers, don't be sad. Quickly bring these 4 corpses back to Master. That's the right thing to do. Third junior brother, you take eldest senior brother and youngest junior brother follow behind. Let's go. After saying that, he turned his head and walked in front of me. He reached out his hand and asked me for the square sky fan. The square sky fan was originally given to me by the old president, so it didn't have much use for me. I hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything and directly handed the square sky fan to him. Su Ying-xiu's attitude was still as cold as ever. After receiving the square sky fan, he didn't say a word to me and walked out of the cave. On the other hand, Jiang Dongqing's expression was a bit awkward. He moved in front of me and helplessly said to me, Zhou, this is the first time I've met second senior brother and the others. I don't know why he is so cold to you. However, Master personally said that you are also his disciple. When you go back and see Master, you can formally acknowledge him as your master. In the future, you will be fellow disciples, and there will be no misunderstandings that can't be solved. He probably still thought that there was some conflict between me and Su Ying-xiu, but I knew that I didn't know Su Ying-xiu at all. His cold attitude towards me definitely wouldn't be so simple. Also, the old president had been avoiding me all this time. It was obvious that it would be as simple as what he said. If I went back to meet him and perform the ceremony of taking him as my teacher, I would become the old president's disciple. However, I didn't need to mention this to him, so I smiled and nodded. It's fine. Senior brother Su is probably worried about the sect. You guys go first. I'm quite interested in this giant corpse and want to stay behind to study it. As for the matter of becoming his disciple, I'll find some time to visit the old president after leaving this place. At this moment, Su Ying-xiu and Jiang Dongqing had already brought the scholar's corpse to the entrance of the cave. They stopped and waited. Jiang Dongqing also didn't want to linger. He nodded to me and said, "Take care." Afterwards, he also walked towards the entrance of the cave. As soon as he left, I turned around and focused on the giant corpse behind me. Was this giant corpse a living Tai Sui? Also, what was the meaning of Master Wan's prophecy? I still had many questions in my heart. However, I had a feeling that the answer to all of my questions lay in this giant corpse. I lifted my eyes to look at the giant corpse. The giant corpse was still covered in purple plants, but it looked a little different from before. At first, I didn't notice it, but after a few seconds, I realized that the giant corpse wasn't moving anymore. The first time I saw this giant corpse, the purplish-blue plants that covered his body were constantly moving. The giant corpse's body was constantly shrinking and expanding. During this shrinking and expanding process, countless wisps of energy gushed out from the giant corpse and filled the entire corpse sect. At this moment, the giant corpse and the purplish-blue plants on his body were strangely quiet. They didn't move at all. I couldn't help but frown and ponder. I vaguely remembered that when Su Ying-xiu and I had just entered the Heavenly Yin cave, the purplish-blue plants on the giant corpse's body weren't as quiet as they were now. Could it be that after we lured the corpse sect's ancestor out, something happened to the purplish-blue plants? Just as I was about to take a step forward, I suddenly heard a cry of surprise from behind me. I turned around but didn't see anyone. However, from the voice, I knew it was Su Ying-xiu and his fellow disciples who had just left. Before I could think further, Su Ying-xiu and the others rushed back from the only passage leading to the Heavenly Yin cave. The 3 of them looked a little frightened. I raised my voice and asked them what happened. Su Ying-xiu and the drunkard were still staring at the passage. Jiang Dongqing turned around and said to me while panting, "The passage suddenly collapsed. Gravel fell and blocked the entire passage." I frowned. Although I didn't know why the passage collapsed, the 3 of them had the Heavenly Master cultivation base. When I was only at the acupoint ceiling realm, I was able to break the stone wall to get here. Even if the wall collapsed, it shouldn't have been able to stop them. Before I could ask further, Su Ying-xiu and the drunkard turned around and said to Jiang Dongsheng, the roots of the purplish-blue plants were dancing in the passage. That's why the gravel collapsed. Moreover, the roots contained a huge force. When they were waving, it wasn't any weaker than a full force attack from the Heavenly Master. After he said that, I was frightened. It wasn't any weaker than a full force attack from the Heavenly Master. What kind of power was that? As soon as he finished talking, a loud rumbling sound came from the passage behind them. This time, even the entrance was filled with gravel. It looked like the entire passage was about to collapse. My attention wasn't on the falling boulder, but on the dancing purplish-green plants. It was just as Su Ying-xiu had said. The purplish-green plants around the tunnel seemed to have come to life as they shook in all directions. Because they had taken root in the entire mountain wall, it wasn't just the tunnel, but the entire mountain wall was shaking as if it was about to collapse. This mountain wall was supporting the entire Heavenly Yin Cave. If it collapsed, the entire Heavenly Yin Cave would collapse. With my current cultivation base, the collapse of the Heavenly Yin Cave wouldn't affect me much. However, the problem was that the roots of the purplish-blue plants were like a huge net that covered the entire Heavenly Yin Cave. When the roots were waving, each root was equivalent to a full force attack from the Heavenly Master. Even if I used all my strength, I wouldn't be able to get out. As I thought about it, more and more purplish-blue roots burst out from the mountain wall and filled the sky. In such a dangerous situation, even if I summoned the snake spirit, Tong Tong, and the sacrificial evil spirit, we might not be able to escape. Only by working together with Su Ying-xiu and the other martial brothers would we have some hope. Just as I was about to call out to them, I glanced around and realized that they were in a daze. Even though they were facing me, their gazes weren't on me, but were instead staring blankly at something behind me. Looking at their dazed gazes, my heart shuddered. Only then did I suddenly remember that the last time I had obtained the Heaven's blood, there seemed to have been a landslide and an earthquake had occurred. This time, the purplish-blue plants had burst again. Could it be? Thinking of this possibility, my body instantly stiffened. I shivered and wanted to turn around. Just as I was turning, I heard a loud roar. As expected, the giant corpse had woken up. The worst-case scenario had happened. I clenched my teeth and turned around to face the other direction. Behind me, the giant corpse was roaring angrily and struggling just like last time. The purplish-blue plants that covered his body had become chains that bound him. As he struggled, they flew in all directions. However, what was different from last time was that the purplish-blue plants weren't able to control him. As he struggled more and more intensely, countless purplish-blue plants burst. There were also some purplish-green plants that were deeply embedded in his skin. He tore them off his body. Yin Nantian and I had taken great care to extract a drop of blood, but this time it flew everywhere as if it didn't cost anything. The broken, purplish-green plants flew to the surrounding mountain walls, and like huge flying axes, they slid and left deep marks on the hard mountain walls. Just the vines that had been blown away had such power. It was hard to imagine how much power the giant corpse had when he struggled. Facing the giant corpse that was dozens of meters tall, although I had the power to fight against the Heavenly Master, I felt really helpless. It was no different from the last time when I had sealed his acupoints. Last time, the giant corpse had been bound by the purplish-blue plants, and Yin Nantian and I had escaped. This time, we had no way out, and the purplish-blue plants couldn't control the giant corpse. How could we escape? I turned to look at Su Ying-xiu and the others. Their expressions were similar to mine, full of helplessness and fear. Chapter 442. Just as I thought, no one would dare to fight against such a terrifying giant corpse. Not long after, Su Ying-xiu woke up from his shock. He quickly said to Jiang Dongsheng and the other two, "You two follow me. Since this thing hasn't broken free yet, we might be able to escape. Let's go." After saying that, He took the lead and walked out of the cave. Jiang Dongsheng and the others were panicking and followed him without saying anything. After they left, I hesitated. Although I didn't have much hope, there was strength in numbers. If the four of us joined hands, we might be able to escape. I turned around and called the evil, sacrificial spirit to follow Jiang Dongsheng. When the four corpses of the corpse insect's ancestor appeared, the evil, sacrificial spirit stood there and stared at them. No matter how I called him, he wouldn't come back. However, this time, he became obedient and left with me without saying a word. However, from his expression, he was definitely the calmest among us. He didn't seem to be afraid at all. Instead, he had a faint smile on his face. I found it strange, but it wasn't a good time to ask him. I kept my head low as we walked forward, while keeping an eye on the vines that were randomly flying above our heads. Every time these vines shook, they had the power of a heavenly master's attack. Although they were still entangled with the rock wall, it was hard to say when they would break and fall. We ran as fast as we could, and soon we reached the entrance of the cave. The tunnel that connected to the outside world was nowhere to be seen. However, since the entire wall was broken, there were tunnels everywhere. The only thing we had to worry about was the complicated vines. The giant corpse was still struggling, and the vines had broken a wall. After the rocks had collapsed, the vines had formed a giant web. It was easier said than done to pass through this giant web. After stopping for a while, Suing Xiu turned around and looked at the giant corpse. Then, he handed the 4 square sky fans to Jiang Dongsheng and asked the fat drunkard to let Jiang Dongsheng take care of the eldest senior brother's body. After doing all this, he stared at the giant web of vines for a while. Then, he turned around and said with a serious expression, "The vines are too dense, so it's hard to judge their trajectory. You guys wait here. Old 3, and I will try to cut open a passage. You guys observe the situation. If it goes well, follow us immediately. If it doesn't, we'll come back and think about it." Then, he called the fat drunkard and walked side by side toward the giant web of vines. As I looked at Suing Xiu's back, I couldn't help but admire him. The disciples taught by the old president were all very responsible. Moreover, he mentioned me in his words, and his attitude towards me didn't seem to be as hostile as before. While he was pondering, the two of them had already walked to the vines. With a stomp of their feet, they leaped into the air. Unbeknownst to them, a long sword had appeared in each of their hands. With a sword incantation, the 2 long swords, wrapped in a shocking aura of Taoism, slashed heavily at the huge net of vines in front of them. Although the purplish-green vines were tough, they were completely unable to withstand the attacks of 2 young god celestial masters. Under their slashes, at least a dozen vines in front of them were broken, and a dent appeared in the giant net. When I saw this, I became excited. If the 2 of them could cut through 10 vines, then they could cut through 100. Although the huge vine net was thick, as long as we continued to cut along this indentation, we would be able to force a path out. Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard obviously had the same idea. After exchanging glances, they didn't say a word and flew forward with the 2 swords in their hands. Just like last time, another 10 vines were cut. The 2 of them took a few steps forward. Jiang Dongxing's face was also filled with joy. He carried his big senior brother's body and turned to me with a smile. "Zhou Yi, let's prepare to go over. Fly in the air and wait for second senior brother to cut open the passage. Then, we'll rush over as fast as we can." I nodded. Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard were flying in the air to cut the passage. Jiang Dongsheng and I had to fly up as well. Flying for a short period of time was a technique that could only be mastered by those who had reached the Celestial Master cultivation. Although I had the power of a Celestial Master, I didn't have a Celestial Master technique, so I couldn't do it. However, with the sacrificial evil spirit, he could definitely fly me up. This wasn't a problem. Jiang Dongsheng and I moved together. When we reached the bottom of the huge vine net, Suing Xiu and the fat drunkard had already slashed for the 3rd time. The effect of this slash was still impressive. It cut many vines in front of us. However, in the process of slashing, one of the vines behind them swung and almost hurt Suing Xiu. Fortunately, he was agile enough and dodged it. After dodging, It seemed that Su Ying-Xiu also felt that the passage was about to open. He turned his head and activated his Dao Qi, urging the two of us to hurry up and get ready to break out. Jiang Dongsheng and I naturally didn't hesitate and flew to the depression that Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard had cut open. However, after going up, I realized that the situation wasn't good. Originally, I thought that the vine was just an accident. However, when we arrived in front of it, we realized that the space that they had cut open had many other vines waving over. Although they hadn't completely blocked the space, they had almost blocked it. After a while, I was afraid that the other vines would completely occupy the space. If that was the case, at least Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard could get out first. Jiang Dongsheng and I would stay behind. As long as we summoned the snake spirit and Tong Tong, we had 5 heavenly masters here. I was confident that we could cut open another passage. However, the problem was that through the space in front of me, Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard seemed to be in trouble. The huge vine net seemed to be denser the further out we went. Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard continued to slash. However, the vines that were denser were clumped together. Their efficiency plummeted. Each swing of their sword could only cut a few vines. Facing the denser vines, cutting a few vines was better than nothing. They couldn't even take a step forward after swinging their swords a few times. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, I couldn't help but call for the sacrificial evil spirit to stop. I was prepared to observe the situation. Jiang Dongsheng didn't have any misgivings and wanted to rush in before the vines closed. I quickly pulled him back. Before I could say anything, Jiang Dongsheng said hastily, "Why are you pulling me back? Let's go in and help. I'm afraid that senior brother can't hold on for much longer." It seemed that he had also realized that the situation wasn't good. I shook my head and said, "Their cultivation bases are far higher than ours. Once things go wrong, they have the ability to escape. If the two of us rush in now, we'll only cause more trouble for them." Jiang Dongsheng was silent for a while. Then he passed the square sky fan and big senior brother's body to me. He gritted his teeth and said, "Help me take care of big senior brother. I'll go and help." Then, without waiting for me to react, he lifted his feet and dashed forward. But after he took a few steps, he stopped again. After I stopped him, the vines in the pit had completely gathered together. There was no gap for a person to pass through. Even Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard's figures couldn't be seen. Although Jiang Dongsheng had a heavenly master cultivation base, he was much weaker than Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard. He couldn't break through the vines, so he could only stand there in silence. I sighed and asked the evil, sacrificial spirit to go with us. I wanted to persuade him to retreat to avoid being hurt by the nearby vines. However, Jiang Dongsheng didn't want to retreat. He stood there, frowning and staring ahead. The giant corpse behind us roared louder and louder. The vines in the Tianyin cave shook more violently. Slowly, the vines in front of us became denser. I looked around. With the density of the vines, I was afraid that Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard couldn't retreat even if they wanted to. Moreover, the dense vines had completely blocked our vision. We couldn't see Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard's figures. We could only see the light from the vines occasionally. The two of them were still in the blockade of the vines. As time passed, Jiang Dongsheng's face grimaced. Eventually, he gritted his teeth and turned around to tell me that he wanted me to help him take care of eldest senior brother. He wanted to go there and try to save Su Ying-Xiu and Su Ying-Xiu. He also said that if something went wrong, if I had the chance, I must send Fang Tianshan and eldest senior brother's remains to the old president. He had made up his mind to die. I wanted to persuade him, but he didn't wait for my answer. He directly dashed forward and crazily hacked the vines with his long sword. I hesitated. The giant corpse was about to wake up. If I couldn't find a way to escape, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to escape death. Should I go with Jiang Dongsheng to find a way to meet Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard? Although my power wasn't good, with the help of the evil sacrificial spirit, the snake spirit, and Tong Tong, it would be much more efficient than Jiang Dongsheng. Perhaps I could meet Su Ying-Xiu and the fat drunkard. As soon as this thought popped up in my head, before I could take a step forward, I heard a fierce roar behind me. Right after that, all the purple-blue vines in the Tianyin cave seemed to go crazy. Their shaking frequency was much higher than before. Even the rocks on the top of the cave cracked and fell. The falling rocks weren't able to harm me, but the frantically waving vines brought about an even greater danger. Not only were Su Yingxiu and Jiang Dongsheng trapped in the vines, even Jiang Dongsheng, who was standing in front of me, was struck by a vine on his shoulder. His body swayed, and he fell towards the ground. In the process of falling, he spat out a mouthful of blood. I didn't have time to think and asked the evil sacrificial spirit to take me there. The evil sacrificial spirit was extremely fast. It was even faster than Jiang Dongsheng's falling speed. Not waiting for him to hit the ground, the evil sacrificial spirit grabbed his body and brought him to the ground. When we reached the surface, I first dragged Jiang Dongsheng and eldest Marshall brothers' bodies to a place where there weren't any falling rocks. Only then did I have time to check on Jiang Dongsheng's injuries. There was a deep cut on his shoulder. His clothes were torn, and his skin and muscles were torn. A lot of blood was gushing out. I couldn't help but be frightened. As a cultivator, as his cultivation base increased, his body's toughness would also increase. For example, when the rocks hit my body, I didn't have any reaction. They bounced off my body, and I didn't feel any pain at all. I didn't feel any pain. Jiang Dongsheng had a heavenly master cultivation base, and his body was much stronger than mine. However, that vine had hurt him like this. It was really scary. If one vine was like this, then what about Su Yingxiu and eldest senior brother, who were trapped in the vines? Jiang Dongsheng's face was pale, but he didn't faint. It seemed his internal organs were also affected. After violently coughing a few times, he grabbed my hand and weakly said, "Quickly, go and see how second senior brother and the others are doing." I remained silent and didn't say anything. Jiang Dongsheng became even more impatient. Disregarding his injuries, he pulled my arm and said with a pleading tone, "After all, I still had some feelings for him." After pondering for a while, I couldn't bear to refuse him. I clenched my teeth and prepared to go and see the situation. However, right at that moment, the entire ceiling of the cave exploded. Countless broken rocks rolled down. Although I wasn't afraid of broken rocks, I was forced to stop. I called the evil sacrificial spirit to protect Jiang Dongsheng and eldest senior brother's bodies. After all the rocks had fallen, I dragged Jiang Dongsheng out of the rubble. At this moment, there was no longer a mountain wall above the cave. The light from the outside penetrated through the dense purple-blue vines and shone into the secret area of the corpse sect for the first time. My attention wasn't on the top of the cave. Instead, I raised my head to look at where Su Yingxiu and eldest senior brother were. When the rocks fell, I clearly felt the aura of the heavenly master seal. If I wasn't mistaken, Su Yingxiu and eldest senior brother had already used the heavenly master seal, their final trump card. Although Su Yingxiu's attitude towards me had been cold, I couldn't help but feel a bit of sorrow in my heart. However, this sorrow didn't last for long. I soon discovered another fact. The roars that had been lingering in my ears had disappeared, and the surroundings were frighteningly quiet. What happened? Why did the giant corpse suddenly calm down? I had a strong feeling of uneasiness in my heart, so I braced myself and turned around to look. The giant corpse was still standing in the same place, but his floating posture had changed. At this moment, he was quietly standing on the ground, and the countless purple-blue vines on his body had disappeared. Only a thick purple plant that looked like a root was stuck in his chest. It seemed that the root of the purple-blue vine had been planted in his body. The giant corpse's hands were placed on the thick root. From his posture, it was clear that he was trying to pull it out. Inch by inch, the giant corpse pulled out the purple vine's root from his chest. Although he didn't roar or show any expression on his face, I felt my heart go numb. I didn't know what kind of pain he was enduring at this moment. The more terrifying the pain, the more furious he would be after he pulled it out. Eventually, the purple root was pulled out from the giant corpse's chest along with a black ball-shaped object. Then, an unprecedented deep roar filled the entire cave. Even with my cultivation, I felt a sharp pain in my eardrums. Chapter 443. Feeling the terrifying power of the giant corpse's roar, I felt my scalp tingle. A primal fear rose from the bottom of my heart. There was only one thought in my head, which was to run away. However, I couldn't move my legs. It seemed there was an invisible force binding me to my spot. No matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't move. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the giant corpse's roar finally stopped. Both of his hands grabbed the roots of the purplish-green plant in front of his chest and swung it. Along with his movements, the giant vine net covering the entire Tianyin cave collapsed. Countless vines were torn and scattered everywhere. Even some vines next to me whistled and dashed toward me and Jiang Dongsheng, who was still on the ground. Instantly, my heart went numb. I wanted to dodge, but the force binding me was still there. Not to mention using Taoist techniques, I couldn't even move my body. If I can't avoid it, Jiang Dongsheng's body might be able to withstand the vines for a while and survive. But I'm not a celestial master yet. I might not even be able to withstand a single vine. While I was panic-stricken, the evil sacrificial spirit jumped in front of me. He didn't seem to be affected. He simply waved his hand and blocked the vines in front of him. From his casual movements after entering the Tianyin cave, he had absorbed the thick Yin energy in this place. His power had increased again. At least, he was stronger than Su Yingxiu and the other man. I was afraid he wasn't far from the Yang God, celestial master realm. After blocking the vines in front of him, he didn't stop. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind me and eliminated the dangers that I hadn't noticed. The giant corpse didn't stop waving his vines. It was obvious that he hated the vines that bound him to the extreme. Rather than waving his hands, it was better to say that he was dismantling the vines. It was obvious that he wanted to completely destroy the purplish-green plants. Thus, the entire Tianyin cave was destroyed. Countless vines flew everywhere. Not only the walls of the cave, but even the ground was destroyed by the flying vines. If the evil sacrificial spirit hadn't blocked the vines, Jiang Dongsheng and I would have been shot and turned into sieves. After the vine net in front of us collapsed, two badly mangled corpses fell from the sky. They landed not far from us and made two loud thuds. I looked and felt gloomy. Those two corpses, whose faces couldn't be recognized, were Su Yingxiu and the other man who had been trapped in the vine net. When I sensed that they had used the Celestial Master's seal, I knew that they had no hope of escaping. Now, the giant corpse had gone berserk and completely dismembered the huge purplish-green plant. The two people trapped in the middle of the vines were also in great danger. Facing such a terrifying power, it was already lucky that their corpses hadn't been completely destroyed. Jiang Dongsheng also noticed the two corpses. He struggled to crawl up from the ground. His body trembled as he tried to move over to check on them. However, my body was currently tied up, and I couldn't make any violent movements. How would he go over? He struggled to move for a long time, but he still couldn't take even half a step. In the end, he could only sit back down on the ground and stare blankly at the two corpses. He was silent for a long time. Not long after the vine net collapsed, the roots of the purple-green plant in the giant corpse's hand also cracked. At this moment, the giant corpse seemed to have vented enough. He threw the remains of the purple-green plant aside and looked at me. It was the first time I had seen the giant corpse's eyes. After our eyes met, I couldn't help but shiver. The giant corpse's eyes were bloodshot, sparkling with endless hatred and madness. It seemed he wanted to tear the entire world apart. A primal fear covered my entire body. My throat felt dry. I wanted to run away, but my body didn't listen to me. I stood there in a daze. The giant corpse didn't look at me for a long time. Soon, he took action. He lifted his foot and walked toward me. Although I had interacted with Xiao Jin many times after he had transformed, I still felt an endless pressure when the giant corpse walked towards me. The fear in my heart slowly disappeared and was replaced by despair. At this moment, I finally understood how Yin Nantian had felt when he faced Xiao Jin. Although he had the cultivation base of a Yang God Celestial Master, He couldn't withstand a single blow from the complete Tai sway. The giant corpse wasn't fast. However, since he was so big, he only needed a few steps to cross the entire Tianyin cave and stand in front of me. The mountain-like Tai sway stood in front of me. I couldn't even see his eyes. I tried to lift my head, but I could only vaguely see his face. At this moment, the giant corpse looked skeptical. He didn't attack me directly. He just blankly looked at me for a few seconds. Seeing his behavior, I calmed down. I recalled the first time I met Xiao Jin. When Xiao Jin first appeared by the Yellow Spring River, he was as intimidating as this giant corpse. However, when he faced me, Xiao Jin had a warm attitude. He didn't want to hurt me. He even treated me like his family. Although this giant corpse was bigger and his color was different from Xiao Jin's from his appearance, I could tell that he was the Tai Sui. Could it be that he would be as friendly to me as Xiao Jin? While I was still thinking that I was lucky, the giant corpse looked impatient. He lifted his foot and stomped on me. The sudden change made me dumbfounded. The binding force on my body made it impossible for me to dodge. As I was about to be killed, the evil, sacrificial spirit stood in front of me at the critical moment. He didn't use any technique or attack the giant corpse directly. He just roared at the giant corpse. It was strange that after the evil, sacrificial spirit roared, the giant corpse seemed to understand something. His face changed, and the crazed look in his eyes disappeared. His bright eyes gazed at the evil, sacrificial spirit. After a long moment of silence, he suddenly roared like thunder. "Oh, who are you?" Hearing his voice, I was shocked. This giant corpse could talk. Compared to the giant corpse, the evil sacrificial spirit's body was extremely small. I didn't know how strong the evil sacrificial spirit was when he was at his peak, but right now, his cultivation base was much lower than the giant corpse's. However, facing the giant corpse, he looked arrogant. He snorted and raised his right hand in front of his chest. A black ball of light appeared in his palm. "It's the same power. Don't you recognize it?" After listening to the evil, sacrificial spirit, the giant corpse was even more puzzled. After a few seconds of silence, his thunderous voice arose again. This time, he asked again, "Who are you?" The evil, sacrificial spirit's face was cold. He put away the black ball of light in his palm and turned around. He pointed at me and said, "You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know who he is." Following the evil, sacrificial spirit's movement, the giant corpse's eyes turned to me. This time, his eyes didn't have any crazed or hateful look. There was only suspicion and suspicion. He looked at me in silence for a few minutes. "Is it him? No, it can't be." After a moment of silence, the giant corpse suddenly faced the sky and roared crazily. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the evil, sacrificial spirit. Then, he looked at me and said, "I don't have much time. You guys wait for me here." Then, he turned around and left us, heading toward the Yin energy passage. The heavenly Yin cave was really high, but the Yin energy passage was only around 10 meters high. It was impossible for the giant corpse to pass through. However, he had used his great strength to smash the top of the cave and create a passage made of crushed stones. The stone wall that separated the Yin energy passage and the 4 caves and 8 halls of the corpse sect also collapsed. After the giant corpse passed through the passage, he swung his arm. I saw the buildings in the flying zombie cave not far from us turn into ruins. The cave that extended in all directions had been flattened by the giant corpse, turning it into a huge, open valley. Originally, due to the mountain wall's obstruction, I couldn't see far from here. But now, in this vast ruin, my eyes could follow the giant corpse's body. After the flying zombie cave was completely destroyed, the giant corpse continued to move forward and arrived at the purple zombie cave. Just like before, he swung his arm, and the purple zombie cave was completely destroyed. But what was different from before was that the elders in the flying zombie cave had already died, so there was no one left. However, there were many disciples in the purple zombie cave. Following the giant corpse's movements, they were destroyed just like the buildings. Countless broken limbs flew in all directions, and in an instant, the smell of blood soared into the sky. The giant corpse didn't stop and continued to move forward. After the purple zombie cave was the black zombie cave. After the black zombie cave, he didn't let go of the white zombie cave, which was the outermost area. The further we went, the more corpse sect disciples there were. The giant corpse didn't want to let any of them go, and he crushed the entire corpse sect. It wasn't until he reached the edge of his field of vision that the giant corpse finally stopped. However, he didn't immediately turn around. Instead, he reached out with his hand and grabbed a few corpse sect disciples. He casually threw them behind him, and they became part of the broken corpses. He repeated this action several times in a row, forcibly capturing nearly 100 people who had escaped. Then, he finally turned around and came back. On the way back, he stretched out his hands and pushed the countless broken corpses on the ground. He looked like a mantis that was rolling a dung ball. The broken corpses piled up as he moved forward, creating a bloody and terrifying scene. There were thousands of corpse sect disciples, but I'm afraid none of them managed to escape this time. As the giant corpse got closer and closer to me, the broken corpses piled up, forming a small mountain that was almost as tall as the giant corpse. There were also some scattered stones. I didn't know what kind of divine power the giant corpse had, but it was still very easy for him to push these things. When he finally returned to the Heavenly Een Cave, the pile of corpses was almost as tall as the Heavenly Een Cave. It was even taller than the giant corpse. It was like a mountain of corpses and stones. When I raised my head to look at this bloody and terrifying pile of corpses, I recalled the prophecy that Taoist Master Wan had given me. Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang, all of them are absurd. Desolate grave, flesh mound, and endless Taoist scriptures. Previously, I saw the so-called Zhou Wu, Zheng Wang, and the desolate grave and heavenly fan, but I didn't know what the flesh mound and endless Taoist scriptures were referring to. At this moment, I had an epiphany. Wasn't this pile of corpses a human flesh mound? Chapter 444. I was bewildered as I looked at the absurd scene in front of me. My mind was blank. Ever since I had embarked on the path of cultivation, I had experienced many life and death battles and seen countless corpses. However, I had never seen thousands of corpses piled up together like this. Even the corpse storage hall of the corpse sect didn't have so many corpses. Although cultivators had immortal techniques, they were still human beings. Seeing so many corpses of their own kind, no matter how high their cultivation base was, they couldn't remain indifferent. While I was dumbstruck, the giant corpse hurriedly lifted his feet and stepped into the mountain of flesh. His legs slowly sank into the pile of broken corpses and rocks. Then, half of his body was buried in the rubble. I was puzzled. I could say that he had destroyed the entire corpse sect to vent his anger. But now he was gathering corpses and burying himself in the pile of flesh. I couldn't help but ask the evil sacrificial spirit in front of me, "What is he doing?" The evil sacrificial spirit coldly answered me, "Struggling at death's door." Struggling at death's door? What does that mean? Before I could ask, the giant corpse suddenly roared again. His thick hair suddenly fluttered in the wind and seemed to extend a lot. Then he inserted his hair into the pile of corpses. When I was at the Yellow Spring River, I saw Goldie's hair connected to countless human corpses. The last time I came here, I also saw the giant corpse's hair connected to human corpses. However, this time I didn't see those corpses. What was he doing now? I asked the evil, sacrificial spirit. He shook his head and said, "This is an innate divine ability of the Tai Sui. He can absorb the power of the origin from the corpses. However, he just wants to absorb his own power to prolong his life. Unfortunately, it's all in vain." What is the power of the origin? I asked again, but the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and didn't answer me directly. I'll know later. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant corpse suddenly let out a sorrowful cry. The thick hair that was inserted into the pile of corpses retracted. Then, the aura of the entire person suddenly changed. There was no longer the feeling of madness and terror from before. Instead, there was a feeling of despair lingering around him. He was buried in the pile of corpses in a daze, and was silent for a long time. I turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He had just said that the giant corpse's efforts were futile. Looking at the giant corpse's dispirited face, it seemed he had suffered a great blow. I tried to move my body. The power that had restrained me was gone, and the giant corpse didn't move. I thought for a while and decided to ask the evil sacrificial spirit what I should do next. However, before I could say anything, the evil spirit turned around and said, "Follow me." Then, he didn't wait for my reply and walked toward the giant corpse. I hesitated for a moment, then gritted my teeth and followed her. When we stood in front of the giant corpse, the evil sacrificial spirit looked a little sad. He quietly watched for a while before speaking to the giant corpse. "You've lost your power of the origin, and your blood of the heavenly path is gone. How long do you want to endure?" The silent giant corpse finally moved. He turned around and looked at the evil, sacrificial spirit. Then he stared at me and said in a low voice, "Thousands of years have passed. The heavenly path doesn't tolerate us anymore. What else do you want?" Although his words were directed at me, I didn't understand what he was saying at all, so I could only remain silent. The evil, sacrificial spirit continued, saying coldly, "The heavenly path doesn't tolerate you, but it doesn't tolerate us. If it doesn't tolerate us, we will change the sky." "Huh!" The giant corpse suddenly laughed, a look of disdain on his face. "Change the sky? Ha! Although I've been trapped here for thousands of years, I know the outcome of that battle. I don't know how you managed to escape, but you've already failed once. Do you still have any illusions in your hearts? Last time, you wanted to borrow the power of the Tai Sui clan. What power do you want to borrow this time?" I didn't understand what he was saying, but I did understand the last few words, Tai Sui clan. This giant corpse really was the Tai Sui. The evil priest suddenly laughed, but he only laughed coldly before stopping. He looked at the giant corpse with a burning gaze and said, "The power of your Tai Sui clan is enough. Why do you need to borrow any more power?" The giant corpse seemed stunned. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "The power of the Tai Sui clan has long since disappeared. There is no Tai Sui left." The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "Don't you see? The origin still exists. How can it disappear?" When the giant corpse heard this, he suddenly turned to look at me. After staring at me for a long time, he said, "Right now, he's too weak." The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head again. "He's not weak. He's just asleep." "Asleep?" The giant corpse laughed again. "My ancestor is also asleep in the mountain and sea realm. So what if you've changed the world? Aren't you afraid that my ancestor will wake up and take away your essence?" The evil sacrificial spirit continued to laugh coldly, his voice filled with ridicule. "The mountain and sea realm? Haha, if he could take it away, why would he have thrown it away in the first place? The mountain and sea realm? Haha, the mountain and sea realm has long since changed." To me, the two of them seemed to be talking to each other like they were reading some heavenly scripture. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it seemed like they were arguing. The giant corpse didn't get too worked up and didn't seem to want to argue with the evil sacrificial spirit any further. Listlessly, he asked, "Why did you help me undo my shackles?" The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "We just happened to run into each other, that's all. However, now that you've reached the end of your lifespan, after you die, I'll consume your fleshly body. That should help me recover some of my power. As for the remaining shaman chi in your body, I might as well return it to its essence and give it to him." As he spoke, the evil sacrificial spirit pointed at me. I was stunned, but soon understood. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be telling the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. Furthermore, after he died, the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume his fleshly body. I couldn't believe it. Even if the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to consume the giant corpse's body, why would he say that? Furthermore, he wanted the giant corpse to give me his shaman chi. That was preposterous. The evil sacrificial spirit's actions were preposterous, But the giant corpse's actions were even more preposterous. He turned to look at me, and after a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Very well. Since the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate the Tai Sui clan, everything must return to its essence. However, I'm afraid my meager power won't be enough to wake him up." A smile finally appeared on the evil, sacrificial spirit's face. He nodded and said, "It will be of some help." Then, he ignored the giant corpse and turned to me. "Go and sit cross-legged in front of him. He will release his shaman chi for you to absorb. Once you absorb his shaman chi, you will probably reach Heaven Master Realm." I was completely dumbfounded, but when I heard Heaven Master Realm, I was stunned. I asked confusedly, "Heaven Master Realm requires one's mental state to reach a certain level in order to push open the door. Is it really possible to just absorb shaman chi?" The evil sacrificial spirit suddenly looked up at me and smiled. "That door doesn't have to be pushed open. Plus, it's impossible for you to push it open. You can only smash it open." I was shocked. I recalled back to when I'd reached glory of consciousness realm at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Society. In that illusion, I'd heard the voice speaking to me as I faced the river in front of me. "Wisdom can cross the river. Ignorance can cross the river. Sages can cross the river. Bandits can cross the river. Butchers can cross the river. Dogs can cross the river. You can't cross the river." The evil sacrificial spirit had said that I couldn't push open the door, and the voice had also said that I couldn't cross the river. My mind was in a daze as I walked to the giant corpse and sat down. Before I could retract my consciousness, I felt a vast amount of shaman chi enveloping me. Before I could even absorb it, the shaman chi had already squeezed into my body through my limbs. I already had the cultivation of glory of consciousness, and my heaven meridian was already filled with shaman chi. Now that the shaman chi had squeezed in, my heaven meridian was about to explode. Compared to the shaman chi that had enveloped my body, only a small portion of it had entered my heaven meridian. If I were to absorb all of it, even if my heaven meridian expanded by 10 times, I wouldn't be able to handle it. Such terrifying power was far from just heaven master power. Was the evil, sacrificial spirit wrong? Could I really absorb such terrifying shaman chi? Chapter 445. There was a limit to the human body. When something reached the limit of what it could bear, it would lead to serious consequences, such as a complete collapse of the body. However, at the same time, the potential of the human body was almost limitless. Those who regularly exercised knew that when people exercised, it was very easy for the body to reach its limit. At that time, the body would be abnormally tired and weak. However, after persevering for a while and surpassing this limit, the body would feel as if all of its energy and strength had suddenly returned. This was an example of a person's potential exploding and surpassing the limit. At that moment, I was in the same situation. The endless shaman energy in the surroundings had completely buried me and was crazily gathering in my meridian of the heavens. I had used almost all of my strength to prevent the meridian of the heavens from collapsing. However, the surrounding weapons were much stronger than me. Just as I felt the meridian of the heavens crack inch by inch, and I couldn't bear it anymore, the shaman energy that had squeezed into the meridian of the heavens suddenly shrunk a lot, as though it had instantly disappeared. The pressure that the meridian of the heavens had to bear decreased until I couldn't feel it all. I was stunned by the sudden situation. After a few seconds, I came back to my senses. The shaman energy didn't disappear, but when it reached the bottom of the vein of heaven, it merged with the enormous shaman energy source stone formed by the 7 stars of knowledge. The sorcerer chi disappeared, but the sorcerer chi source stone grew larger. The shaman aura source stone is the source of the shaman aura in my body. After it is enlarged, it is equivalent to completely absorbing the shaman aura from the outside world and turning into power that I can use in the future. In other words, a part of the sorcerer chi had been completely absorbed by the nest. Before I could rejoice, the meridian of the sky, which had just become empty, was once again filled with a large amount of shaman energy. The speed at which the shaman energy surged into the meridian of the sky was much faster than the speed at which the shaman chi source stone was absorbing the shaman energy. Hence, the pain from before replayed in my meridian of the sky over and over again. The shaman chi source stone grew bigger and bigger until it occupied half of the bottom of my meridian of the sky. Originally, the shaman chi source stone didn't even occupy 1% of the space at the bottom of the vein of heaven. Now it's dozens of times bigger than before, especially with the existence of the Tao Chi source stone in the vein of heaven. The changes are even more obvious. The volume of a shaman energy source stone is directly proportional to its power. In other words, the shaman energy in my body is tens of times stronger than before. Previously, my shaman chi cultivation was already at glorious memory great perfection. Now, I have the power of dozens of glorious memory great perfection gathered on me. However, I can clearly feel that I haven't reached the heavenly master realm yet. The most obvious sign of the celestial master realm was to condense the celestial master seal. Of course, the celestial master seal is only something that appears when the Taoist chi condenses into a celestial master. I'm not sure if this thing will appear when the witchcraft chi condenses into a celestial master. Apart from that, becoming a celestial master was a process of being reborn. Although there was only a step between glory of knowledge, great perfection, and celestial master, glory of knowledge was ultimately still immortal, while celestial master was already close to being a half immortal. Therefore, in the process of becoming a celestial master, regardless of whether the celestial master seal has been condensed or not, one will have a feeling in the unseen world. However, I don't feel anything at this moment. After absorbing power that was 10 times that of a perfect state of glorious consciousness, I still hadn't reached the level of a celestial master. This wasn't scary. There was a natural chasm between an earthly master and a celestial master. No matter how difficult it was, it wouldn't be an exaggeration. However, what was scary was that even though I had absorbed so much shaman chi, the shaman chi surrounding me didn't seem to decrease at all. It still enveloped me in an overwhelming manner. It was true that humans could stimulate their potential to fight against their limits, but there was a limit to everything. One's potential was almost limitless, but it was not limitless. However, I didn't have any other choice. I could only bite the bullet and continue. Very quickly, the shaman chi source stone continued to grow in size. From occupying half of the bottom of the vein of heaven to occupying more than half, it almost filled the entire bottom of the vein of heaven. At this moment, I finally had a feeling. It was as though a voice had suddenly appeared in the space in front of me, calling for me to walk over. I didn't move, but I slowly closed my eyes. When my eyes were completely closed, there wasn't any darkness in front of me. Instead, it was clear as though I was standing in the clouds. Thick white mist spread under my feet, and the warm sun shone on everything. At the end of the clouds in the distance, there was a huge door that shone with golden light. The voice that was calling for me seemed to have come from that door. I didn't hesitate at all. I lifted my feet and stepped on the mist, quickly arriving before the huge door. As long as I pushed open this door, I would become a celestial master. I would be reborn and transcend the mortal world. At this moment, my body was filled with limitless power. Although the huge door in front of me was huge, I had a feeling that it couldn't stop me. As long as I wanted to, the door would definitely be pushed open. With endless confidence, I walked forward, raised my hands, and pressed them on the huge door. Just as I had imagined, there was a resistance from the huge door. The resistance was really strong, but compared to the huge power that filled my body, it was nothing. I just used a little bit of strength, and the huge door in front of me had a slit. The door was moving. I was ecstatic. Every cultivator had a dream of becoming a celestial master. My dream of becoming a celestial master was about to come true. Just as I gathered all the strength in my body and prepared to push the door open, I suddenly felt my chest and back heat up. Then, Two shadows shot up into the sky. One was silver black, and it came out from my chest. The other was dark green, and it appeared from my back. I lowered my head to look, and my expression changed drastically. One of the shadows was a qilin, and the other was a black dragon. They were the two Miaojiang venomous insects that I had planted in my body. Yang Shilong had told me that these two venomous insects were the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang. Once they were planted, they would take root in the heart. Usually, they would live in harmony with each other until the person with the venomous insects reached the celestial master realm. Then, the venomous insects would fall off the host body and be retrieved by the person who planted the venomous insects. When the host died, their cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insects. The person who planted the venomous insects could use the venomous insects to obtain all the host's power. When Yang Shilong had told me this, I had only thought that it was a fantasy. It was still uncertain whether I could become a celestial master in this life, so I didn't care. However, I had never thought that in just a few years I would reach this step. After realizing this problem, my restless heart completely calmed down and my heart wavered. Was the ancestral venomous insects of Miaojiang really that powerful? If I pushed open the door today and became a celestial master, would I really die and my cultivation would be taken away by the venomous insects? I was hesitant, but after thinking for a long time, I didn't dare to take that step. One had to be cautious when cultivating. Along the way, I had suffered countless hardships, spent countless efforts, and experienced countless life and death situations. I had gone through so many hardships to reach this step, so how could I be careless? Thinking to this point, I took a deep breath. My hands left the huge door, and I simply turned around to leave. Just as I left the huge door, the scenery in front of me changed dramatically. The thick white mist under my feet disappeared, and the warm sun in my surroundings also disappeared. I slowly opened my eyes, and in front of me was still the ruins of the corpse sect. My body was still surrounded by countless amounts of shaman energy, but it didn't forcefully enter my body like before. Although I didn't push open the door, I could feel that I was only one step away from the celestial master realm. As long as I wanted to, I could step over that boundary at any time and become a celestial master. My cultivation was infinitely close to becoming a celestial master, so the shaman energy couldn't cause me any more confusion. I took a deep breath and stood up. Seeing me stand up, the evil sacrificial spirit that wasn't far from me immediately looked at me. After examining me for a moment, his eyes became doubtful. He opened his mouth and asked, "Why didn't you become a celestial master?" The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation was astonishing. Perhaps he could give me an answer about the ancestral venomous insect in Miaojiang, but now wasn't a good time to ask about it. After absorbing the shaman energy from the giant corpse, I could feel that the vitality of the giant corpse behind me was rapidly diminishing. It wouldn't be long before he died. Before he died, I had a question in my heart that I wanted to get an answer from him. I shook my head at the evil sacrificial spirit, signaling him to calm down. Then I turned to look at the giant corpse in front of me and asked him in a deep voice, "Do you know how many living Tai Sui there are in this world?" The Tai Sui was the source of shaman energy. Even if I entered the celestial master realm, if I wanted to cultivate in the future, I could only obtain power from the Tai Sui. That was why I had to ask this clearly. The giant corpse's reaction had become very slow. He slowly lowered his head to look at me. After a few seconds of silence, he weakly smiled and said, "Living Tai Sui? My Tai Sui clan is not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. It has long been annihilated. How could there be a living Tai Sui? Even I'm just struggling at death's door. I can't be considered alive. There are no living Tai Sui in this world. Impossible." I didn't know about the others, but Xiao Jin was a living example. How could there not be a living Tai Sui? I kept silent for a while, then continued. "I have seen a living Tai Sui." The giant corpse's voice became weaker. He slowly shook his head and said, "There is no living Tai Sui. Even if I have been struggling at death's door until now, as soon as I see the sun, the heavenly Tao won't tolerate me. I will be killed immediately If the heavenly Tao doesn't tolerate me, how could I live? Even if you have seen a living Tai Sui, I'm afraid he is dead now. Ha! It's time for my Tai Sui clan to die of old age. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help but recall Xiao Jin. Why did he leave me all of a sudden? If what the giant corpse said was true, then wouldn't Xiao Jin be, while my mind was in a mess, the giant corpse in front of me couldn't stand it anymore. His big eyes slowly closed, and his mountain-like body slowly fell into the pile of corpses. Chapter 446. After a long time, the pile of corpses finally calmed down, burying the giant corpse. The evil sacrificial spirit came to me. He didn't ask me why I hadn't become a heavenly master. Instead, he walked to the pile of corpses and pulled out the giant corpse's head. Then, he sat down cross-legged and made a hand seal. Then, he quickly tapped on the giant corpse's head. A large mass of gray mist gushed out of the giant corpse's 7 orifices, heading toward the evil sacrificial spirit. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't open his mouth. He just moved his nose, and the gray mist was divided into 2 halves. Both halves were sucked into his body through his arms. Then, I remembered that the evil sacrificial spirit had said that he wanted to swallow the giant corpse's body. It seemed he had used the mysterious Tao Tai technique. This technique wasn't ordinary. It could even swallow the giant corpse. The giant corpse's cultivation base was terrifying. Although he had been trapped here, his witchcraft energy had turned into En energy for the En corpse sect to absorb for more than 1,000 years. His remaining witchcraft energy was still much stronger than that of a heavenly master. I didn't know how much power he had stored in his body. If the evil sacrificial spirit swallowed all of his energy, he wouldn't be able to recover his cultivation base. I didn't say anything and just sat down cross-legged. I adjusted the amount of witchcraft energy I had just absorbed while waiting for the evil sacrificial spirit to finish. I waited for 1 day and 1 night. During this time, the giant corpse didn't stop emitting gray mist. I remembered that when the evil sacrificial spirit had swallowed the corpse puppet at the middle stage of the glorious consciousness realm, it had only taken around 10 seconds. If the gray mist represented energy, the giant corpse's energy was tens of thousands of times greater than the corpse puppet's. After a day and a night, the gray fog in the giant corpse's 7 orifices gradually began to disappear. The head that was exposed outside the pile of corpses became abnormally shriveled, and the evil sacrificial spirit finally opened its eyes. It spat out a mouthful of murky air. It seemed that the devouring process had ended. I was a little excited. I walked to him and asked, "How is it?" After swallowing the giant corpse's power, it should be enough for you to recover your cultivation base, right? The evil sacrificial spirit didn't answer me. Instead, he made a hand seal and adjusted his breathing for a while. Then, he got up from the ground and slowly said, "The power of the Tai Sui is enough for me to recover my cultivation base. However, with my current ability, I can't digest all of its power. I've only absorbed 10%, which is barely enough for me to recover my cultivation base to that of a young God Celestial Master." 10% was enough for the evil sacrificial spirit to recover his cultivation base to that of a young God Celestial Master. This power of the Tai Sui was really overbearing. Then the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about me first. According to my estimation, the evil sacrificial spirit's power should be enough for you to reach the young God, celestial, 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 celestial master. Celestificial spirit thought of my cultivation base more than it. After he stood, and he said, and I also shook my head. I told him about the venomous insect technique I had and the situation of the 2 ancestral venomous insects in my body. Actually, even if he hadn't asked me, I would have asked him for help. Yang Shilong had told me that the Kirin venomous insect wasn't incurable. I just needed a celestial master to help me get rid of it. The evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation base had surpassed that of a celestial master. Moreover, he was knowledgeable. It was the best thing for him to do. After listening to me, the evil sacrificial spirit frowned and asked, "What's a venomous insect technique?" I was dumbfounded when I heard his question. Not to mention cultivators, even ordinary people could talk about venomous insects for a long time. How could the evil sacrificial spirit not know about it? I was skeptical and asked him several times. Eventually, I confirmed that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't joking with me. It wasn't that our definitions of venomous insects were different. It was that he didn't know what it was. I talked and gestured. I told him about the technique that had a strong ethnic aura, including the origin, classification, and forms of venomous insects. After I had been afflicted with the Kirin venomous insect, I had collected a lot of information about venomous insects. I still remember them. After talking for a long time, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't look like he understood. Instead, he furrowed his brows. I thought he didn't understand, so I wanted to tell him again. However, as soon as I opened my mouth, he interrupted me and shook his head. I know the meaning of venomous insects, but it sounds familiar. Familiar? I didn't understand what the evil sacrificial spirit meant. As I was about to ask, he waved his hand and interrupted me. If that's the case, you don't have to hurry to become a celestial master. Don't have to hurry. I want to tell him and see if he could help me get rid of the two venomous insects. After all, the celestial master realm was my dream. However, if there was a chance, I didn't want to drag it out. After listening to him, I was a little worried. I thought he hadn't heard the method I had heard from Yang Shilong, so I told him again. After I had told him, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. We could try to get rid of it, but it's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. You don't have to worry. After I investigate, I will make a decision. I didn't understand what he meant. It's hard to say whether it's a blessing or a curse. Did the old aunt give me some benefits when she cast the venomous insects on me? I thought for a while. At this moment, I had the power of a celestial master. Moreover, the snake spirit and Tong Tong were living in my body. If something happened, the three of us could deal with it. If the three of us couldn't deal with it, even if I became a celestial master, it would be useless. With that thought, I nodded and agreed with the evil sacrificial spirit. I wasn't in a hurry to break through. After we had settled this, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit what he wanted to do next. The relationship between me and the evil sacrificial spirit was very strange. We seemed to be strangers, but at the same time, we were very familiar. He hadn't told me his identity yet, but he was very loyal to me. It could even be said that he obeyed me. Maybe I had some doubts about him at first, but after experiencing so much, I trusted him a lot. I could even say that I relied on him. That was why I took the initiative to ask for his opinion. After hearing my words, the evil sacrificial spirit pondered for a while. Then, he told me that he couldn't store the power of the Tai Sui's body for a long time. He had to digest and absorb it as soon as possible. In addition, he wanted to investigate the two venomous insects I had. So, he wanted me to leave for a while and let me do whatever I wanted. I opened my mouth, but didn't say anything. At first, I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit had recovered his young god, celestial master cultivation base. With his knowledge and means, I was afraid that all the young god celestial masters in the world wouldn't be his match. With such power, together with the snake spirit, Tong Tong, and we might be able to go to Mount Longhu to ask the celestial master sect for justice. At that time, I was wronged by those celestial masters and was chased all the way. I still hated it and couldn't let it go. If it weren't for the MOE bead and the Corpsine sect, I was afraid that I would have been killed by the celestial master sect. However, at this time, the evil sacrificial spirit was anxious to digest the power, so he wasn't in a hurry. It wouldn't be too late to go to Mount Longhu after he came back. Moreover, even without the evil sacrificial spirit, with my current strength, I wasn't afraid that the people of Mount Longhu would come to find trouble with me. Even if I couldn't defeat the young god celestial master, I could easily run away and wouldn't have to worry about my life. Thinking of this, I felt relieved. I turned around and picked up Jiang Dongsheng, who had already passed out, along with the square sky fan in his hand and the body of the scholarly eldest senior brother. Then I left along the path that the Tai Sui giant corpse had created. As for the bodies of Su Yingqiu and the fat drunkard, I originally wanted to collect them. However, after searching for a while, I found that their bodies had already been crushed by the vines. I couldn't find a piece of intact flesh, so I gave up. On the way out, I hadn't even taken a few steps when I heard a ding sound. It seemed that I had kicked something. I quickly looked down and found that it was the 4 small cauldrons that the ancestor of the corpse insect had taken when he came out of the Tai Sui giant corpse. I had seen 2 cauldrons like this before. One was in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, and the other was in the orchard cellar in Shenzhen. I still had the small cauldron that was found in the Meizhou Metaphysics Society, but the one in Shenzhen was taken away by the Public Security Department as evidence. When I first discovered the strange characteristics of these small cauldrons, I had studied them. Later on, I boldly guessed that these small cauldrons were the legendary 9 prefectures cauldrons. Now that I saw 4 similar cauldrons, I didn't want to let them go, so I quickly picked them up. After carefully examining them, I found that these 4 small cauldrons were exactly the same as the Jizhou cauldron. Only the seal characters on them were different. These 4 cauldrons were Shuzhou cauldron, Yangzhou cauldron, Jingzhou cauldron, and Yongzhou cauldron. Since the evil sacrificial spirit was here, I didn't need to make wild guesses. I gave the cauldron to the evil sacrificial spirit and asked him if he knew what it was. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't take it. He just glanced at it and said, "This is a replica of the 9 prefectures cauldron. It originally belonged to you, so you should keep it. If you have a chance in the future, you must find the other cauldrons so that it will be convenient for you to act in the future." His words didn't make sense. However, I was already used to it, so I didn't ask any more questions. I just told him that I had seen 2 of these cauldrons before. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't mind. He just told me to take good care of the 5 cauldrons that I already had and to find the one in the Shenzhen police station. As for the remaining 3 cauldrons, I had to find them if I had a chance. However, I wasn't in a hurry, and there was no need to search for them. From his expression, I could tell that it wasn't a bad thing. I nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I followed him and left the corpse sect. The 800-kilometer-long Tying Mountains were slightly less majestic, but they weren't lacking in length. With the speed of the evil sacrificial spirit and it took us a long time to walk out of the mountain range where the corpse sect was located. Just as we were about to continue walking along the mountain road, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly waved his hand, signaling me to stop. Before I could ask anything, I looked up and saw 3 figures floating in the air not far away from us. Looking at their faces, they were the 3 celestial masters from Mount Longhu that had chased us before. I had been in the corpse sect for several months, but I didn't think that they would be so patient and wait until now. Not long after we stopped, the 3 people landed in front of us. The one in front was still the fat celestial master. He stared at me with a smile on his face and said, "I traveled far and wide to find you. Yesterday, there seemed to be an accident in the corpse sect, so I didn't have time to check it out. I didn't expect to meet you here. Zhou, this time you have nowhere to run, right?" He couldn't suppress the smile on his face, and his fat face almost deformed. However, he definitely didn't know that I couldn't suppress the joy in my heart at this time. I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit was in a hurry to go into seclusion and wouldn't be able to find the people from Mount Longhu to take revenge. However, I didn't think that they would come to me first. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.